Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I'd planned this trip for weeks. Just me, my tent, and the woods. No phone, no internet, no distractions. I picked a small, quiet state park about 2 hours from the city, a spot that wasn't on any of the busy trails. I wanted peace. I wanted to get away from everything for a while. What I didn't expect was to feel like I was being watched. I got to the campsite just as the sun was starting to drop. The light was warm and golden, and everything felt calm. I parked my car, unloaded my gear, and walked down the narrow dirt path to the clearing where I'd set up camp before. I was lucky, there was no one else around, just the trees and the quiet. I set up my tent, slowly, carefully. I'm not the fastest camper, this was my second or third time doing it solo. I took my time, making sure the stakes were in right, the rain fly tight, the ground tarp straight. I didn't want any leaks or a collapsed tent at night. As I hammered the last stake in, I noticed something odd. The woods felt too quiet. Usually, around this time, there'd be a few birds chirping or the distant rustle of small animals. But it was dead silent. Like the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off and started unpacking my bag. I had a small camp stove and was just boiling water when I first heard it. My name. Just a whisper, so soft it almost blended in with the wind and the leaves. I froze, listening hard. Jake, it said again, barely more than a breath. I looked around, eyes scanning the edges of the clearing. No one. The trees stood still, no movement. I told myself it was probably the wind, maybe something I was hearing wrong. Maybe a neighbor camper way off in the distance calling their buddy. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" but got nothing back. No footsteps, no response. I sat down for a minute, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows between the trees. I reminded myself I was alone, safe. Probably just my brain playing tricks. I finished dinner, ate quietly, and packed up my stove. I was just about to crawl into the tent when I heard it again. Same soft whisper, "Jake." Except this time it was closer. I swear, the voice sounded right at the edge of the trees, maybe 10 feet away. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it toward the shadows. Nothing. The beam cut through the dark brush, but only empty trunks and branches stared back. I told myself it was probably some guy messing around, maybe drunk or trying to scare people. But it was just too weird. I called out again, voice a little louder, "Who's there?" Nothing. No answer, no movement, no sound. The woods stayed quiet. I zipped up my tent door and sat inside with my flashlight resting on my lap. I kept turning the beam toward the treeline, heart pounding a bit. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I wasn't about to ignore the fact someone might be watching me. For a while, I heard nothing but the occasional snap of a twig somewhere deep in the trees. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I'd left it on airplane mode, but apparently, I'd gotten one bar. I pulled it out, saw a text from an unknown number, "You shouldn't be here." My heart dropped. I stared at the screen, fingers trembling. I didn't reply. I didn't want to talk to whoever this was. I locked my phone and stuffed it deep in my bag. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound felt amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, even the hum of the wind through the branches made me jump. Morning came, slow and gray. I packed up quickly, kept looking over my shoulder. Nothing followed me out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still on me. Later that day, driving home on the highway, I caught a car behind me. A beat-up old pickup, windows tinted dark. The truck stayed right on my bumper, tailing me for miles through the twists and turns of the country roads. Every time I glanced in my mirror, the driver's face was hard to make out, but there was definitely someone in there. I tried to lose them, took a few random turns, but the truck stayed on me. I was sweating, heart hammering, when finally the pickup slowed and pulled off onto a side street. I kept going, relieved but still uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, someone heading the same way. But I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of my name whispered in the dark, or that text that came from nowhere. And for months after, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder when I was alone, even in places I'd always felt safe. The night before, everything felt normal. I had picked a spot deep in the woods, miles away from any marked trail or campsite, just a clearing I'd found on a topo map and figured I could reach by hiking off path. I wanted to get away from people, from phones, from everything, and this place seemed perfect. No lights, no noise, just the trees and the stars. I got there late afternoon, set up my tent, and then spent the evening reading a book by a small campfire. It was quiet in that way only deep woods can be. I didn't hear anything unusual all night. No footsteps, no voices, no snapping branches or rustling bushes close by. Just the occasional hoot from an owl and the wind moving through the leaves. I fell asleep pretty easily, even though I was camping alone for the first time. When I woke up, it was just barely dawn. The sky was still dark but fading to a pale blue. I unzipped the tent and poked my head out, the cold morning air hitting my face. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. Bare footprints in the soft dirt right by my tent. They were fresh, the edges still sharp, and they led away from my tent, disappearing into the dense trees. The strange part was, I'd been so careful picking this spot because I thought it was isolated miles from any trail. No way anyone else would be here without me seeing them. I mean, I was deep in the woods, not on some busy path. I crouched down and looked closer. The prints were big, like a man's size 11 or 12, and the toes were splayed like someone was walking barefoot. There was mud on them, and some dirt smudges from stepping on leaves, but no other footprints around, no sign of shoes or boots. Just those prints leading away, like someone had been standing next to my tent in the middle of the night. My heart started pounding, but I told myself I had to be rational. Maybe an animal had messed with the dirt and it just looked like footprints. Or maybe someone had passed through long before I set up. But the soil was soft and moist from last night's rain, and the prints looked fresh, definitely not old. I grabbed my flashlight and walked carefully around the tent. No other signs of anyone else. No gear left behind, no trash, no footprints anywhere else. Just those tracks leading away from my tent into the woods. It was almost like someone had been there, watching me sleep. I stood up, my hands shaking a little. The woods suddenly felt too quiet. No birds singing yet. No squirrels scurrying. Just silence. I felt like I was being watched, like something wasn't right. I decided to follow the footprints to see where they went. I didn't want to just sit there and wait for whoever left them to come back. So I packed a small day pack with water, my phone, which I kept off except for emergencies, and my pocket knife. I figured if I was going to follow, I should be ready. The prints went through thick brush, under low branches, and over fallen logs. There were no other footprints beside them, just those bare feet prints, one after another. The forest was dense and still, and every little noise seemed louder, the crunch of leaves under my own boots, the creak of tree branches in the wind, the distant call of a crow. After about 10 minutes, I stopped. The prints just stopped. Right in the middle of a small clearing, the dirt was undisturbed after that point. No sign anyone had gone further. I looked around, heart hammering, and that's when I noticed something else. A faint smell. Not like campfire smoke or wood, but like sweat mixed with something else. It was faint but definitely human. I felt exposed and vulnerable. I didn't have cell service here, no way to call for help if something went wrong. I stuffed the thought down and started back toward my tent, trying to stay calm. I told myself maybe someone had walked through hours ago and had gotten lost or was scared off. When I got back, I saw the footprints again, closer this time. They hadn't changed. I checked my tent, nothing disturbed, no zipper pulled, no sign of anyone trying to get in. I sat down, trying to make sense of it. The sun was rising now, casting weak light through the trees. I thought about packing up and leaving, but part of me wanted to stick it out, to prove I wasn't going to be scared away. The morning passed slowly. I kept glancing around, my eyes searching every shadow, every tree line. No one showed up. No strange sounds. Just me in the woods. That afternoon, as I was cooking my dinner, I heard a noise. Not far away. Like a twig snapping, but slower, deliberate. I stopped, held my breath, and shone my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing moved. I packed up quickly after eating, ready to hike back out before dark. The footprints kept crossing my mind, and that sound from the woods made me feel like I wasn't alone. I zipped up my tent and started walking toward the car. The trail back was long and twisting, but I wasn't looking forward to staying another night. Then, halfway down the trail, I saw something that froze me solid. A man standing about 50 yards ahead, just at the edge of the trees. He wasn't moving, just staring. He looked tired, his clothes dirty and worn. His eyes locked on me, but he didn't say a word. I couldn't tell if he was waiting for me or just watching. My heart thudded so loud I thought he must hear it. I didn't want to yell or run. What if he was dangerous? I just kept walking slowly, keeping my eyes on him. He didn't move. Just stayed there until I reached the main road, then disappeared into the woods like he'd never been there. I got in my car and locked the doors. I drove away fast, never looking back. The whole way home, I kept thinking about those footprints, about that silent man, and about how close I'd been to something I didn't understand. I never went back to that spot, and I don't plan to. That's one camping trip I won't forget. The fire had been dying down for a while, but I didn't want to call it quits yet. I was out there alone, deep in the woods, and it was already past 9 at night. I was camping on this little patch of cleared ground I found after a long hike, and the quiet felt different than any other place I'd been. Not peaceful, just heavy. Like the woods themselves were watching. I tried to poke the fire back to life, blowing on the embers, tossing in some dry twigs I gathered. The flame flickered, then grew, casting warm light around my small campsite. That's when I saw him. Just past the tree line, barely visible in the firelight, stood a man. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but no, he was real. Just standing there, completely still. The way he was looking at me didn't make sense. It wasn't curiosity, exactly. More like waiting. Silent, watching. I froze. The firelight wavered, and so did my nerves. I wasn't sure if I should call out, run, or just pretend I didn't see him. My heart was pounding hard enough I thought he might hear it. I said his name, or maybe it was just a breathless, "Hey?" Nothing. No movement, no sound. I scanned the area around him. No flashlight, no gear. Just a man, standing there in old, dirty clothes. His face was shadowed, but I could make out tired eyes, a little sunken, maybe a few days' worth of beard. No smile, no frown. Just watching. I grabbed my phone from the ground, ready to call someone, anyone, but no signal. Not surprising, out here. I tried to tell myself it was a lost hiker or someone else camping nearby, but no one else's fire was burning, no voices echoing in the dark. The silence pressed in. The woods, usually filled with the crackle of bugs and animals moving at night, seemed to hold their breath. I strained to hear any sound other than my own breathing. I threw a few more twigs on the fire, louder this time, hoping to catch his attention or maybe scare him off. The flames roared up, but the man didn't flinch. I slowly reached for my pocket knife, feeling its cold metal comfort against my palm. Then I stood, keeping the fire between us, and said again, "Hey, you lost?" Still nothing. I took a step back, then another. The man stayed where he was, unmoving. Something about the way he was just standing there, watching, made my skin crawl. I felt like a trapped animal, eyes wide, waiting for a signal to run. I started to gather my things quickly, tossing the small bag over my shoulder. The man didn't move a muscle, but I could feel him staring as I packed. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees where he stood. The beam caught his face for a second, eyes wide open, unblinking. Then, just like that, he turned and disappeared into the dark woods without a sound. I didn't follow him. I just grabbed my stuff and booked it back to the trailhead as fast as I could. Safe in my car, doors locked, engine running, I looked back at the woods. Nothing. I never went back to that spot. I spent that whole day hiking by myself, just trying to get away from everything. The trail was longer than I thought, more exhausting, but the kind of tiring that makes you feel like you earned something. The kind of tired that makes you want to crash hard and not move for a while. I was alone for most of it, which was the point. When I finally got back to my campsite, the sun was already starting to dip below the trees. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, cool in that early evening way. But something felt off the second I stepped into the clearing. My tent was zipped up, but that wasn't what caught my eye. It was how everything looked different. Like it wasn't how I left it. I had left my pack next to the tent, some firewood stacked in a rough pile, my water bottle and shoes where I'd left them. Now, my backpack was zipped shut and leaning neatly against a tree, shoes tucked in just right, firewood split into tidy little bundles. Everything was too organized, like someone else had been there. That's when I noticed a note. It was on top of my backpack, just a simple scrap of paper folded in half, with neat handwriting on it. "Thanks for the hospitality." My first thought was that it was a prank. But I was miles from any real trail, not close to any other campers or cabins. No one I knew. No reason for a prank. I looked around the clearing. No footprints, no trash, no sign of anyone else camping here. I got this cold squeeze in my chest, but I tried to tell myself maybe someone just found my camp while I was gone and tidied up, thinking I was away or lost. Maybe they were trying to help. I called out a couple times. No answer. I decided to check my gear. Everything was there, my food, clothes, and phone. Nothing was missing or broken. But the whole thing felt wrong, like I wasn't alone, even though there was no one around. I started setting up my tent again, faster this time, with this nervous energy I couldn't explain. Every little noise made me jump, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls that felt like too much quiet. I kept glancing into the trees. Later, after the sun was fully gone, I made a small fire and sat by it, trying to calm down. That's when I noticed something else. The firelight caught on something on the edge of the clearing, a pair of eyes, just barely visible, watching from behind a tree. I froze. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. I whispered, "Hey?" The eyes vanished. I scanned the woods but saw nothing. I wanted to pack up and leave, but I was too tired and didn't have the energy to hike out in the dark. So I stayed by the fire, sitting with my knife on my lap and my phone ready. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was there, just outside the circle of light. At first light, I packed everything up quick and got out of there. I didn't look back once. I was camping alone that weekend, just me in the woods. I picked a spot pretty far off the beaten path, a little clearing surrounded by thick trees, away from any trails or other campers. I liked the quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy and full of small sounds you only notice when you're paying attention. I'd been hiking all day and was dead tired, so I set up my tent, got a fire going, and passed out pretty quickly. I didn't sleep all that well, but it wasn't just because of the usual stuff like bugs or weird noises. There was this niggling feeling I couldn't quite place. Like something wasn't right. But I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I'd been alone plenty of times before without anything weird happening. That morning, when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was that my tent zipper wasn't fully closed. It was halfway undone, like someone had zipped it partway but didn't finish. I'm usually really careful about closing it all the way, especially with how many bugs are out there. So that stood out right away. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up slowly, careful not to make too much noise. Outside, the ground looked the same, no obvious signs that someone had been there. Then I noticed the footprints. Fresh, muddy footprints leading away from the tent into the forest. That's when the quiet started to feel different. The prints were about the size of an adult man's shoe, and they weren't random. They led straight from the tent's entrance, heading deeper into the woods, stepping lightly but purposefully. They didn't come back. No loops or circles, just one way. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat go dry. I hadn't heard anything during the night, no snapping twigs, no voices, no crunching footsteps. Just the usual sounds of the forest. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag and shone it down the path the prints took. The trees were dense there, branches low and thick. The mud from last night's rain was still soft, so the prints stood out sharp and clear. I wanted to follow them, figure out if someone was still nearby or if this was some kind of mistake, but something made me hesitate. I went back to the tent and checked all my gear. Nothing was missing or disturbed except the zipper. My sleeping bag was folded up like I had left it, my food bag untouched, everything where it should be. I sat there, feeling a mix of relief and growing unease. Who could have been close enough to unzip my tent without waking me? And why leave footprints heading off like that? The forest felt too quiet. Even the birds weren't calling like they usually did at dawn. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I packed up quickly, but I kept looking over my shoulder. Every shadow, every slight movement in the trees made me tense up. When I finally got back to my car, I locked the doors and sat inside for a long time, just staring at the dark woods. I didn't see anyone else, but I knew someone had been there. And that was enough. It was late afternoon when the guy showed up at my campsite. I was about an hour into setting up my tent, trying to get everything sorted before dark, when I heard footsteps crunching through the dry leaves. I figured it was probably another camper, maybe someone who'd lost their way or just wanted to say hi. I was wrong. I looked up and saw this guy standing maybe 20 feet away, just watching me. He was wearing an old jacket, dirty jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. His face was kind of hard to read, but there was something off about the way he stood, like he was waiting for permission to do something, but also like he was making sure I was watching him. I nodded and said, "Hey." He didn't say anything right away. Just stood there, eyes flicking between my tent and the trail behind him, like he couldn't decide if he wanted to stay or run. Then he spoke, slow and quiet, like he was trying not to scare me. "Mind if I join you? Just for a while." His voice didn't sound threatening, but there was this weird edge to it, like he was testing how I'd react. I hesitated. Normally, I'm not the type to invite strangers into my space, especially out here, but something about him didn't scream danger, just awkward and maybe a little lost. So I said, "Sure, I guess. I mean, I'm not exactly a hero or anything." He walked over and sat down a few feet from the fire I'd just gotten going. We didn't talk much at first. Mostly just stared at the flames. But I could feel his eyes on me, like he was studying me or waiting for me to say something else. After a while, I tried to make conversation, asked if he was camping nearby or just passing through. He said he'd been hiking, got turned around, and figured he'd stop for the night. That part sounded believable, but then I noticed he didn't have a backpack or any gear. No water bottle, no food, nothing. I asked about that, and he just shrugged, saying he left it back on the trail or something. That didn't sit right with me, but I didn't press it. Instead, I started packing some extra food, thinking maybe he was just desperate. Hours passed, and the light faded. The woods got quiet, except for the fire crackling. He stayed close, never really relaxing. Kept glancing around like he was expecting something or someone. Every time I looked away for a second, I'd catch him staring at me with this weird smile, like he knew something I didn't. At some point, I realized he wasn't making any move to leave. I even mentioned it, joking that the fire was dying and I needed to get some rest soon. He just nodded, said he wasn't tired yet. Later, I went to refill my water bottle from the creek nearby. When I got back, the fire was low, and he was still sitting there, motionless, eyes locked on me. I felt this growing knot in my stomach. My gut told me I needed to get away, but I didn't want to start anything, so I just kept quiet. Eventually, I told him I was going to turn in for the night. He said, "Okay," but didn't move. I zipped up my tent and climbed inside, heart hammering. Through the thin fabric, I could see his silhouette sitting not far from the fire pit. I lay still, listening to the woods. Nothing but the usual nighttime noises of crickets, the wind through the trees, the occasional rustle. Then I heard him whisper my name. I froze. Whispered again. Louder this time. I didn't say anything, just stayed as quiet as possible. He didn't come closer after that, but he didn't leave either. By dawn, I was packed and ready to leave. I waited until I was sure he was still asleep or maybe passed out, then slipped quietly to my car and drove away. I never saw him again, but every time I go camping now, I double-check for footprints, keep my tent zipped tight, and don't talk to strangers who show up uninvited. I was out in the middle of nowhere, just me and my backpack, trying to get a few days of peace away from everything. The kind of trip where you don't see a single person for miles. I wasn't exactly lost, but I had chosen a spot off the usual trails, somewhere quiet, deep in the woods. I'd been hiking all day, and the plan was to camp overnight, then head back in the morning. I'd been relying on my phone's GPS to keep me on track, mostly to make sure I didn't wander too far and get really lost. I'm not super outdoorsy or anything, but I figured if I kept an eye on my location, I'd be fine. At least, that's what I thought. I set up camp near a small clearing surrounded by thick trees and scrub. It was peaceful, and the sky was just starting to turn orange when I finished pitching my tent. I sat for a bit, eating some granola bars, and pulled out my phone to check the GPS one last time before settling in. That's when things started to feel off. The GPS was lagging, which I figured was normal in the deep woods. Signal wasn't great out here, after all. But when I looked at my location, it showed me in a place that didn't make any sense. Like, the coordinates on the screen were pointing to somewhere at least 5 miles away from where I was. I thought maybe it was just a glitch or the phone getting confused. I reset the app, turned the phone off and on, but it still showed the wrong spot. Then I noticed something else. The signal was weak, like really weak. Not the usual 1 bar or no bars kind of weak, but more like the phone was barely picking anything up. It said no service in the corner, but the GPS was still trying to pinpoint my location. Except it wasn't me. It was some random spot on the map. I tried calling a friend, but the call wouldn't go through. Text sat in the outbox. I turned the phone off and on a couple more times, hoping to get a better signal, but no luck. That's when I realized something was wrong. I wasn't just off the grid, I was completely unreachable. I thought maybe my phone was just glitching, so I grabbed my compass and paper map from my bag and started trying to figure out where I actually was. The forest around me looked the same: thick trunks, low branches, the occasional moss patch. Nothing looked out of place, but I knew I wasn't anywhere near the coordinates the phone was showing. I spent the next hour wandering a bit, trying to find a spot with better signal or a recognizable landmark, but the trees only got thicker, and the signal stayed dead. When I stopped moving, the woods got eerily quiet. No birds, no wind, no rustling animals. Just this heavy silence that made me keep glancing over my shoulder. After a while, I realized I'd left my tent and some of my gear behind when I tried to find better signal. The idea of leaving my stuff there unsettled me, but I kept telling myself I'd come back. That night, the woods felt different. The usual sounds of nighttime, frogs, insects, owls were missing. Instead, there was a subtle noise, almost like someone was walking softly just beyond the trees, but whenever I stopped to listen, it went quiet. I stayed awake for hours, watching my phone. The screen flickered, the GPS showing the same random coordinates. No bars, no signal, no way for anyone to find me if something went wrong. The next morning, I packed up and started walking back toward what I thought was the nearest road, using my compass and map. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of footprints in the mud, big, heavy boots that didn't belong to me. They weren't fresh, but they were close enough to make my stomach tighten. The forest felt alive, but not in a good way. Like someone had been there recently and was watching me. Every shadow seemed to shift, every bird's call cut off abruptly when I moved. At one point, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond a thick patch of trees. When I blinked, it was gone. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted, thirsty, and more than a little scared. The thought that my phone had been messed with, that someone had altered the GPS coordinates to keep me lost and unreachable, didn't leave my head. I tried calling out a few times, hoping someone would hear me, but the woods swallowed my voice. Eventually, after hours of walking, I found a small dirt road. It looked rarely used, but at least it was something. I followed it, and after what felt like forever, I saw a car driving down the road. I waved frantically, and the driver stopped. It was a couple on a weekend trip who took me to the nearest town. When I showed them my phone, it still had the wrong coordinates. I switched to airplane mode, restarted, and only then did it find the correct location and signal. Back in town, I told the local ranger station what happened, but they said no reports of anyone else being out in that part of the forest, no missing persons or anything like that. They thought maybe it was a technical glitch or some weird interference. But I'm pretty sure someone was out there, messing with my phone, trying to keep me lost and alone. And if I hadn't found that road, I don't know how long I'd have been stuck. Ever since then, I don't trust my phone in the woods. I carry an actual map and compass. And I never camp alone where my signal can be that weak. It started on the second night. I'd set up my tent in this clearing I found about halfway through a 3-day solo hike. It wasn't a popular spot, no marked trails nearby, just me and the trees. The first night was quiet, peaceful even. I made a small campfire, cooked some food, and went to bed early, feeling pretty good about escaping the city noise. But on the second morning, I noticed something strange. There were these faint trails in the dirt, like someone had been walking in circles around my tent. They weren't old, probably from the night before. At first, I thought maybe I'd made them myself, walking around while setting up camp. But I was pretty sure I hadn't gone that far out of the way. The path circled my tent like some weird pattern, maybe 6 or 7 feet out, all the way around. I shrugged it off. Maybe a raccoon or some other animal made those marks. But the thing is, they were definitely human footprints. Small, narrow boots. Not a big animal. I stared at them for a while, tried to find a logical explanation. Could be someone else camping nearby, maybe kids messing around, but I hadn't seen anyone else all day. That afternoon, I was gathering firewood a bit farther from camp when I caught a glimpse of movement through the trees. At first, I thought it was a deer or something, but then I saw the shape more clearly. It was a man. Just standing there, maybe 30 yards away, watching. He wasn't making any noise. Not even breathing loudly or shifting his weight. Just still. I froze. Then he noticed me and took off running deeper into the woods. No shout, no wave, just disappeared. I didn't chase or call out, just got back to camp quick. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing branches snapping, little rustles in the bushes, but every time I looked or listened closer, it was silent again. The feeling of being watched didn't let up. My fire kept flickering, and I caught myself jumping at the smallest noises. The third morning, those footprints were back. The circle was there again, a little closer to the tent this time. Clear as day, like someone had paced around me while I was asleep. And the ground looked disturbed, like the dirt had been kicked up. I checked all my gear. Nothing was missing or moved inside the tent. My bag was zipped tight, the food was packed away. But the footprints, they told me someone had been there while I was asleep. That day I packed extra food, extra water, and kept a sharp eye out while hiking. The woods seemed quieter, but I spotted more signs, broken twigs on paths I'd taken, random footprints that didn't match mine, like someone was following or at least watching me. No one ever got close enough to see me, but I felt them just out of sight. By the fourth night, I was paranoid. I didn't even try to make a fire. I sat with my flashlight and my knife close. When I heard the rustling and the soft crunch of boots on dirt, I stayed still, heart pounding. Then I heard it. Slow footsteps walking in a circle around my tent. Not random or panicked, measured, deliberate. Every few seconds, the steps paused, like whoever it was listening or waiting for me to make a move. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The circle lasted maybe 10 minutes, then the footsteps faded away. At dawn, I saw the footprints again. This time, they were so close I could almost reach out and touch them from inside the tent. The guy had circled tighter than ever. I started to wonder if he was waiting for me to leave, or what his plan was. The thing is, no yelling, no demands. Just this creeping presence. Like I was an animal in his territory. I thought about calling the cops once I got out, but I didn't know if anyone would believe me. The nearest ranger station was miles away, and there wasn't even cell signal in the clearing. On the 5th morning, I made a choice. I packed everything up quickly and started hiking back the way I came. The forest was eerily quiet, but I kept looking over my shoulder. About halfway back, I heard footsteps again, this time behind me. I didn't dare look, just kept moving faster. The steps sped up too, matching my pace, maybe even a little faster. I broke into a run, heart racing, lungs burning. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and I risked a glance back. No one there. I kept running until I reached the road and flagged down a passing car. I told the driver about the footprints and the man watching me. He nodded, said there had been reports of some guy stalking campers around that area, but no one had caught him yet. I never went back there, and I don't camp alone anymore. The way someone could be so close without making a sound, circling me night after night, it was the worst kind of fear. Not because of what they did, but because of what they could have done and didn't. I was out hiking alone on one of those trails in the state park that hardly anyone uses. It wasn't a long trip or anything, just a weekend thing to clear my head, you know? I usually stick to the more popular spots, but this time I wanted something quieter. The kind of place where you don't see another person for hours. It felt good to be out there, away from everything. On the first day, everything was normal. The woods were calm, the usual birds chirping, a squirrel or two darting through the brush. I found a nice spot near a small creek and set up camp late afternoon. Nothing fancy, just my tent, a little stove, and some food. After dinner, I built a small fire and sat there watching the flames die down before crawling into my sleeping bag. The next morning I woke up early, packed a bit, and decided to explore more before heading back. I took a side path I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow and overgrown, but it looked like it might loop back to the main trail. After about 20 minutes, I saw smoke rising through the trees. That caught my attention immediately, because I hadn't seen or heard anyone else all day. Curious, I moved toward the smoke, and that's when I found the campsite. It was small, barely hidden under some pine trees, maybe set up just the night before. There was a campfire still warm, the smell of burnt wood fresh in the air. Around the fire pit were empty food wrappers, snacks like chips and candy bars, some water bottles, a few beer cans. The stuff looked recent, like whoever was there hadn't left long ago. What really unsettled me was that no one was there. No footprints leading away from the camp, no gear packed up, nothing to show where they'd gone. It was like whoever stayed there just vanished. I thought maybe they'd left in a hurry, or maybe were still nearby, so I called out a couple of times, just a simple, "Hey, you around?" No answer. I waited a bit, but all I heard was the creek bubbling and the wind brushing through the trees. That's when I started noticing little things. The fire wasn't just warm, it was still smoking lightly, like it had been out for maybe an hour at most. The food wrappers were scattered as if someone had been eating while sitting around, but there was no sign of a chair or blanket to sit on. Just a few sticks propped up awkwardly against a rock. It looked like the place was left mid-use. I figured maybe they went for a walk and planned to come back. But then, on the ground near the fire, I saw something else, tiny, barely noticeable scratch marks on a log, like someone had been nervously tapping their nails or maybe trying to carve something and stopped. I picked up a beer can and shook it gently. It sounded full, like there was still some liquid inside. I was careful not to touch too much, but that can felt cold, like it had been sitting out in the shade and not long since handled. That's when I started feeling like I wasn't alone. I glanced around the trees and noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no animals, just silence. Usually, in the woods, even if you can't see much, you hear something: bugs, frogs, squirrels, but here, nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the time. Signal was weak, but I had a bar. Then I noticed the GPS said I was off the trail, but the coordinates didn't match the map. It was like my phone had no idea where I was exactly. That made me nervous, but I figured maybe it was just bad reception. Still, the feeling that someone had been here and maybe was still nearby was growing stronger. I didn't want to stay at that spot, so I started moving back toward the main trail. The woods still felt weirdly quiet, and every so often I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows shifting behind the trees, branches cracking softly. But every time I stopped and looked, no one was there. At one point, I thought I saw a figure, just a dark shape standing maybe 50 yards away, motionless behind a big oak. I blinked and it was gone. I quickened my pace, checking behind me now and then. My heart wasn't racing yet, but my stomach felt tight. When I got back on the main trail, I stopped to rest and had a snack. While eating, I heard footsteps crunching on the dry leaves nearby. Not too loud, not fast, just slow, steady steps. I looked around. No one on the trail in sight. The footsteps came from the bushes, but when I turned toward the sound, there was nothing there. I didn't know what to think. Maybe some other hiker, maybe an animal. But the footsteps didn't sound like animal paws. I packed up and started walking faster, watching my back the whole way. It was a long walk back to my car, and I didn't see anyone else until I got to the parking lot. That night, I slept with the door locked and the lights on. I never told anyone what happened, mostly because it sounds stupid, an abandoned camp with signs someone was there but no people, and I'm still not sure what to make of it. But I know I wasn't alone out there. And I wasn't just imagining the feeling of eyes watching from the trees. I've always liked going fishing alone. There's something about the quiet, the slow pace, and just being out on the water away from people that settles me. I'm not the type to chat much or hang around crowds, so a remote lake with barely any other boats was perfect. I packed my gear early, drove out before dawn, and got to a spot I'd been to a few times before, but this time was different. The lake was calm that morning, almost unnaturally still. No wind, no birdsong, just the gentle splash of my line hitting the water. I set up near a small inlet surrounded by thick trees, far enough from the main dock that I wouldn't see anyone for hours. The only sounds were the soft lapping of water and the occasional rustle of leaves. For the first hour, nothing much happened. I caught a couple of small fish, nothing to write home about, but I was okay with that. Then, as the sun climbed higher, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A kayak, far off at first, drifting toward me. At first, I thought it was someone fishing too, maybe paddling over to a better spot. But there was something odd about it. The person was rowing, but very slowly, almost lazily, and silently. No splash, no effort, just smooth, quiet strokes that made the kayak glide through the water like a ghost. I glanced away for a moment, hoping it was just the angle messing with me, but when I looked back, the kayak was closer. No one was talking or waving, just sitting low in the boat, staring ahead. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled tight, so I couldn't see their face. No fishing gear or anything, just that kayak in them. My gut tightened. I've been out here alone plenty of times, but this was different. Usually, if someone's coming, they make some noise or wave. This was like they didn't want to be noticed but still wanted to get close. I reeled in my line slowly, trying not to seem tense. The kayak kept moving toward me, slow and steady, like it was on purpose. When it got within maybe 20 feet, I saw their hands on the paddle. No sudden moves, but steady. The water was so quiet, I could hear the paddle just barely skim the surface. I tried calling out, "Hey, you lost?" My voice sounded weirdly loud out there. No response. I looked around to see if anyone else was on the lake, but I was alone. I started feeling trapped, like my little spot wasn't so isolated anymore. The kayak circled once, then moved closer again. The person's head tilted slightly, like they were watching me carefully. I noticed something else. The kayak wasn't drifting with the wind or current. It was actively heading toward me, but so slowly it was almost like they were trying not to make a scene. I tried to stand up in my small fishing boat to get a better look, but it rocked and almost tipped. I sat back down, heart pounding harder now. I didn't want to provoke whoever this was. The figure didn't say anything or make any gestures. Just stared. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal, which wasn't surprising that far out. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. I kept my eyes on the kayak, waiting for something to happen. The person reached into a small bag at their feet, pulled out what looked like a pair of binoculars, and aimed them at me. I froze. My brain was screaming to get out of there, but I didn't want to panic and do something dumb. I looked around again, hoping for another boat or some kind of help, but the shore was empty and the trees thick. The kayak drifted closer still, maybe 10 feet away now. Then, the person finally spoke. A soft voice, almost a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." No explanation, no reason given, just that line. I wanted to ask why, but my mouth went dry. I started to slowly back away in my boat, paddling with quick, quiet strokes toward the shore. The kayak followed, keeping the same distance, not speeding up, just matching my pace. I looked over my shoulder, and they were still watching me, motionless except for the paddle strokes. By the time I reached the shoreline, I scrambled out, grabbed my gear, and started walking fast toward my car. The kayak stayed out on the water, drifting in place like it was waiting. I didn't look back. I got to my car, locked the doors, and drove off as fast as I could, the whole time glancing in the rearview mirror. The kayak never followed beyond the water. I never went back to that lake alone. And I don't fish alone anymore either. I'm not the kind of person who goes hiking in the wilderness alone, but I figured it'd be different with my friend Jake. We'd done a few short trails together before, nothing crazy, just weekend stuff to get out of the city. That day, we decided to tackle a longer route I'd found online. It was supposed to be about 6 miles through some dense woods with a lake at the end. Nothing too technical, but enough to feel like a real hike. We started in the morning, and things went fine. The trail was quiet, mostly trees and the sounds of birds and bugs. Jake and I joked around like usual, talking about work and dumb stuff. The kind of easy chatter you have when you're both tired but trying to keep the mood light. I didn't think anything weird was happening at all. But as the afternoon dragged on, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. First, the trail markers seemed farther apart than they should have been. We missed one sign and had to double back, but even then, the forest looked off. Like the trees were thinner in some spots, and there were patches of ground where the leaves were crushed down in circles, almost like someone had been pacing around. Jake didn't say anything about it, just kept moving. Around late afternoon, I noticed Jake got quieter than usual. He stopped answering my questions as much and started staring at the trees a lot, like he was waiting for something. I asked if he was okay, and he just nodded but didn't smile or joke anymore. That felt weird because he's usually the one making dumb jokes to keep me from overthinking stuff on hikes. We came to a little clearing with a fallen log, and I suggested we stop for a break. Jake dropped his backpack on the ground, took a swig from his water bottle, and sat down without saying much. I sat too, pulling out some snacks and checking my phone for signal. Nothing. The screen said no service, which wasn't a surprise this far in. After a while, Jake stood up and said he was going to stretch his legs. I didn't think much of it. He'd done the same on shorter hikes before. But then he started walking toward the edge of the clearing, deeper into the woods, and I noticed he didn't bring his backpack. I called out, "Hey, wait. Your pack." He waved me off without looking back and said, "I'm just gonna check something out. Be right back." I didn't like it, but I figured maybe he saw some animal tracks or something and wanted a closer look. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, eating a granola bar and scanning the trees, but Jake didn't come back. I called his name a couple of times, louder each time, but no response. That's when I looked at his backpack. It was just sitting there, zipped up, with his water bottle sticking out of the side pocket. Nothing seemed disturbed, no signs of a struggle or anything. I picked it up and checked inside: his phone, wallet, some snacks, a small first aid kit. All the usual stuff. It didn't make sense that he'd leave it behind if he was just going for a quick walk. I got up and started walking the way he went, calling his name again, but the woods felt different somehow. The sounds were quieter, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I saw something that made my heart skip, a set of footprints leading away from the clearing, deeper into the trees. They looked like Jake's boots, but they weren't fresh, maybe a few hours old, based on how the dirt had settled. I followed the footprints carefully, trying to stay calm. As I walked, the light started to change, the sun dipping closer to the horizon, and the shadows grew long and weird. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a branch snapping, a leaf rustling, but when I turned, there was nothing there. At one point, I heard what sounded like breathing behind me, soft and steady. I spun around, expecting to see Jake or maybe another hiker, but no one. Just empty trees and fading daylight. The trail wasn't marked well, and I kept losing the footprints, only to find them again a little further along, like whoever was walking ahead wanted me to follow but not too closely. It was unsettling, and I started feeling that old creeping dread, the kind that makes you want to turn around but also forces you to keep going. Then the footsteps stopped. I came to a small clearing with a shallow stream running through it. There was no sign of Jake. No backpack, no footprints beyond that point, nothing. Just the soft sound of water and the darkening sky. I shouted his name again, louder this time, my voice cracking a little. The forest didn't answer. I stood there for a minute, feeling completely alone. The sun was almost gone, and the woods were growing colder. I knew I needed to get back before it got too dark, but I didn't want to leave Jake out here. I took out my phone again, still no signal, and tried to check the map. The GPS was off, like it was glitching or stuck on a weird spot. I tried restarting it, but it didn't help. I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't even tell which way led back to the trailhead. That's when I heard footsteps again. Not far, but not close either. Slow, careful steps on dry leaves, coming from behind the trees to my left. I froze and listened. No calling, no rustling bushes, just the sound of someone walking softly but steadily. I called out, "Jake?" Nothing. I started moving away from the stream, trying to find the path back. The footsteps followed. I didn't dare run because I didn't know if whoever it was dangerous or not. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. After a few minutes, I finally saw the outline of the main trail through the trees. Relief hit me hard, but the footsteps were still behind me. I broke into a jog, trying not to panic. The footsteps sped up too, not running, but definitely quicker. I didn't look back until I reached the trailhead, where a few cars were parked. No one was around, just the fading light. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started it up. The footsteps stopped as soon as the engine roared. I called the police from my cell once I hit a signal and reported Jake missing. They organized a search party, but Jake was never found. The backpack was returned to me. Nothing inside was missing. Sometimes I wonder if he wanted to disappear, or if someone made him. Whatever happened out there, I don't think I'll ever know for sure. But that night, in those woods, I felt completely watched and helpless, and it was the kind of fear that stays with you even after you're safe. I'd been camping alone for a couple of days in this national forest. It was the kind of spot you pick when you want to get away from everything. No cell service, barely any other people around, just woods and dirt trails. I'd gone there before, never had a problem, so I wasn't worried about doing a solo trip. The first day was all normal, hiking, fishing, cooking over the fire, nothing weird. I picked a good campsite, tucked back off the trail near a little creek. I set up my tent before sunset, made sure the fire was safe and small, then crawled into sleep early. I was beat. But then, about an hour after I fell asleep, I started hearing it. Footsteps. Soft, but definitely footsteps, crunching leaves right outside my tent. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But it didn't sound like any animal I'd heard before. It was slow, methodical, like someone was pacing back and forth. I froze for a second, listening hard. The tent flap was zipped tight, but I could hear those footsteps plain as day, right outside. They'd start on one side of the tent, go all the way around, then come back again. Over and over, like they were walking in circles. I waited, holding my breath, thinking maybe it was some park ranger or another camper checking around. But when I unzipped the tent just to crack and shine my flashlight out, there was nothing. No figure, no shadows, no light from a flashlight or a phone. Just empty trees and bushes. I zipped the tent back up quick. The footsteps stopped for a few minutes, then started again. Same slow circle, crunch, crunch, crunch. It felt like hours, honestly. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining it or if someone was really out there. I tried yelling. Hey! Who's there? No answer. Just the footsteps stopping every time I made noise, then starting again when I went quiet. I checked my phone, no signal. No way to call anyone. The battery was low anyway, and I didn't want to use the flashlight too much, worried it'd give away my position if someone was out there. The forest felt wrong. Usually there's a chorus of crickets or frogs at night, but it was eerily quiet besides those footsteps. No wind, no rustling leaves, just those soft crunches on the dirt and dead leaves. After a while, I decided to stay as still as possible inside the tent and not make any noise. I kept my pocket knife close and my baseball bat next to me. The footsteps kept circling, slower now, more deliberate. At one point, I caught a faint scent, not wood smoke or campfire, but something metallic and sharp, like sweat mixed with rust. It wasn't natural to the forest. I thought about packing up and hiking out, but it was pitch black, and I didn't know the way well enough to do that safely at night. Plus, the person, whoever they were, had to be close. Maybe watching. I felt trapped. Hours passed, and I was sure I was losing my mind. Every few minutes, the footsteps would pause, then continue again. Then, after maybe 4 hours, the footsteps stopped altogether. No crunching leaves, No snapping twigs, just silence. I waited another half hour before finally unzipping my tent to check outside. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of a fire or any recent activity. Just undisturbed leaves and dirt. I packed up at first light, keeping my eyes peeled the whole way back. I didn't see anyone or anything unusual. When I got back to my car, I called the ranger station to report what happened. They said no one else was in the area that night, and no reports of hikers or campers near my site. Just me. I still wonder who or what was circling my tent that night. But whatever it was, they made sure I knew I wasn't alone without ever showing themselves. I was camping alone in this patch of forest that's not too far from town, but far enough that you don't hear cars or people after dark. I needed a break, just wanted to get out of my head, you know? So, I picked a spot next to a small clearing with a big old tree right outside my tent, set up, and started a fire. The first night was normal enough. I cooked some canned beans, sat by the fire for a bit, then zipped up inside the tent and tried to sleep. I woke up maybe around midnight or so to this loud banging on the big tree. It wasn't a woodpecker or a bird. This was too deliberate, like someone was tapping with their knuckles, hard and rhythmic. It caught me completely off guard. I froze, listening. The tapping kept going, slow and steady, like Morse code or something, but I couldn't figure out the pattern. It was a series of short and long knocks. I peeked outside, careful not to unzip the whole tent. There was this figure standing by the tree, a shadow against the faint moonlight. They kept tapping, looked like they were waiting for a response, maybe expecting me to understand. But I had no idea what they were trying to say. I tried to get a better look. The person was dressed all in dark clothes, a hood or something covering their head, so I couldn't see their face. I closed the tent flap quietly, heart thudding. The tapping stopped for a second, then started again. I stayed inside, too scared to say anything or move. The silence around was thick, except for the tapping that felt like it was drilling into my head. I wasn't sure how long it went on, maybe half an hour. I tried to listen for other sounds, no voices, no footsteps besides the tapping, nothing. It was so quiet, except for that tapping. The wind had died down, no rustling leaves, no crickets. Just that tapping. At one point, the person stopped and stepped back. I heard some snapping twigs as they walked away into the woods. I waited, trying to convince myself maybe it was someone messing around, maybe a drunk hiker playing a prank or something. But then, a few minutes later, the tapping started again, this time softer, from a different tree a little farther away. I tried to follow it in my head, but I couldn't make any sense of it. I grabbed my phone, but no signal. I tried calling 911, but no connection. The battery was dying, so I didn't want to waste it. I thought about getting out of the tent to confront whoever it was, but the way the person was just standing there, silent and tapping, made me freeze. It wasn't someone looking for help or friendly. It was like they wanted me to be there, watching and listening, but didn't want to talk. The next morning, I packed up fast. The spot felt different with daylight. I walked around the tree and found some scratch marks on the bark, like someone had used their nails or a knife. Not deep, but deliberate. On the ground near the base were some small rocks arranged in a weird pattern, almost like a crude symbol or something, but it didn't look like anything I recognized. I told the ranger about it when I got back. They said there'd been no reports of hikers out there that night, no campers besides me. They asked if I wanted to file a report, but said without any proof, it'd be hard to do anything. That night, whatever that person wanted to say, they never did. The tapping stopped, and I didn't go back. I don't know what they were trying to communicate, but they made sure I couldn't ignore them. I went camping alone in this pretty remote part of the national forest. It wasn't some official campground, just a spot I picked off a hiking app where I thought I could have some peace and quiet. I got there late afternoon, set up my tent near this little stream, and started a fire. The forest was dense but quiet in a way that felt right, nothing too wild. Just the kind of place I wanted. The first weird thing didn't happen right away. I was cooking dinner when I heard voices, someone shouting close by. I figured it was another group on the trail. Then a man appeared, walking right up to my camp. I froze for a second before he said, "Hey, sorry, this is our spot." I blinked. "I'm pretty sure I'm at the coordinates on the map," I told him, trying to be polite but wary. He shook his head, kind of annoyed. "No, you're in our spot. We camped here last night." I glanced at his group, 3 other people trailing behind. They looked confused, like they really thought this was their camp. I pulled out my phone and showed him the map app. "See? This is where the pin is." He frowned, looked at the trees, the stream, then back at me. "This can't be right. Our spot has a big rock by the water. Right there." He pointed to a place maybe 50 feet away. I walked over. No rock. Just more trees and underbrush. They shrugged, grumbled something about getting lost, and left. I thought it was just a mix-up. That night, I heard footsteps circling my tent. Not far off, just walking slowly on the dry leaves. It didn't sound like animals. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out, but there was nothing there. No movement, no rustling. Just silence. I stayed awake, listening to those footsteps stop, start, and circle around my tent a few times before fading into the dark. The next day, another group came by, this time 2 women and a guy with big backpacks. They asked if I'd seen their camp. I told them this was my spot. They looked confused and insisted this was where they'd left their gear. When I mentioned the coordinates again, they seemed uncertain but kept insisting they'd been here. One woman pulled out a worn map and showed me a hand-drawn circle around a place marked campsite. Their circle didn't match the stream or the trees where I was. It was close, but the landmarks were all off. I told them I was here already. They said they'd come back later to check. They left, glancing back nervously. That night, the footsteps came again. More deliberate this time. I could hear soft talking, whispered words and voices I couldn't quite make out. My heart raced as I grabbed my camping knife and shone the flashlight outside again. Nothing. No one. By morning, I found strange marks pressed into the dirt around my tent, footprints not quite human. They were oddly shaped, narrow, with a strange pattern on the soles, like a design pressed into the mud. I'd never seen shoes like that before. I thought maybe it was some prank or someone messing with me, but the more I looked, the more unsettling it got. A few hours later, a lone guy appeared, walking right up without hesitation. He looked around, smirked, and said, "I think you've been squatting in my spot." I was tired of it, so I asked, "What spot is that?" "This is the only place with a stream and those big pine trees." He laughed, like I was stupid. "You're nowhere near it. Your GPS must be off. I've camped here for years." He tapped his phone and showed me an app with a pin that didn't match mine at all. I tried to argue, but his attitude made me back down. He left, shaking his head like I was the one causing problems. That evening, I stayed up all night, flashlight ready. The footsteps came again, but this time, they weren't circling. They moved straight toward my tent, then stopped just outside the flap. I heard breathing, low and steady, and a faint whisper. I couldn't make out words, but it felt like they were watching me, waiting. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The noises faded after what felt like forever. Next morning, I was done. I packed my gear as fast as I could, heart still pounding. Before leaving, I circled the area, looking for any clue why all these people thought this was their camp. Nothing made sense, no trails leading here, no signs, no clear markers. When I got back to my car, I checked my GPS. The coordinates matched exactly where I'd camped. I double-checked on different apps. Same spot. But if it was my spot, why did all these people keep showing up, insisting it was theirs? I never went back to that part of the forest. I haven't told many people because I'm not sure what to make of it. But every time I think about those footsteps outside my tent and those strange maps that didn't line up, it makes me glad I got out when I did. The first time I heard it, I thought I was losing my mind. I'd been hiking alone for most of the day, just trying to clear my head. The trail I picked was one of those lesser-known loops, the kind where cell service drops out and everything feels miles from civilization. I didn't expect to hear anything but birds and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But then, as I rounded a bend, I caught this faint sound like static, but with a voice over it. A voice, talking. It was coming from the trees, somewhere off the trail. I stopped, squinting into the brush, trying to figure out if it was a radio or maybe someone using a walkie-talkie. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice on the radio kept going, crackling softly. It sounded like a guy, talking about coordinates or something, north 45.6, west 123.4. I remember thinking the numbers didn't make much sense, or maybe it was just random chatter. The tone was low and steady, like the person was trying to stay calm, but there was this weird urgency to it. I called out again, louder this time, but no response. Just the static and that voice playing like a loop. I didn't see anyone around. No tents, no campsites, no other hikers. Just the forest, quiet except for that broadcast. I kept walking, thinking maybe it was a lost hunter or someone running a radio test, but the further I went, the clearer the voice got. Then, I noticed something else, the sounds of footsteps in the dry leaves, but not mine. Soft, slow, almost like someone was pacing nearby. I stopped to listen, heart beating a little faster. No answer when I called out. The footsteps didn't speed up or slow down, just pacing back and forth in the underbrush. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, hoping to find a ranger station or some sign of other people, but no service. The battery was low, too, and the light was fading. I tried to follow the footsteps, thinking maybe I could find the person broadcasting. But the tracks were confusing, some were big, some small. They twisted in circles, leading nowhere. It was like whoever was out there was moving just enough to be heard, but not seen. By the time I reached a small clearing, the radio broadcast stopped abruptly. The silence felt heavier than before. I sat down on a log, trying to calm down. I told myself maybe it was just some hunter's radio, left on by accident. That's when I heard it, the whisper. Faint, almost too soft to catch. "Hello?" I spun around. Nothing. Just the trees and the shadows stretching long in the dusk. I packed up and started walking back, but the radio started again. The voice was different now, faster, almost urgent. I called out, "Hey, if you're out here, please say something." No response. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, but every step felt heavier. The footsteps followed, pacing just out of sight. The radio voice faded, then came back. Eventually, I found the trailhead again, and the radio cut out completely. I didn't look back until I was back in my car, locked doors, engine running. I never figured out who was out there, or what the broadcast meant. But whatever it was, I was glad to leave it behind. I'd been out in the woods for 2 days by myself, just me and my little campsite on the edge of this quiet state park. Nothing fancy, just a small dome tent, a camp stove, some food, and my sleeping bag. I picked the spot because it was kind of tucked away, not on a main trail, and I thought it'd be perfect for some alone time. The first night was pretty normal. I made a fire, cooked some canned beans, then crawled into my tent and fell asleep with the sounds of crickets and a nearby stream. Nothing weird. The second day, I did some hiking, checked out a few spots by the river, and got back just before sunset. That's when I noticed a backpack. It was sitting just a few feet outside my tent flap. Not leaning against a tree or anything, just laying there, like someone had dropped it. I didn't hear anyone come by. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I froze for a moment. I wasn't expecting company, especially not out here. The backpack was old, kind of beat up, and didn't look like it belonged to any of the other campers I'd seen earlier near the main parking lot. There was no name tag or anything on it. I stood up slow and looked around, but the woods were still quiet. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows. I called out a few times, but no reply. I didn't want to freak out right away. Maybe it belonged to someone who was lost or just passing through, and they left it there for a minute. I figured I'd check it out, see if there was anything helpful in there, maybe a map or something that could tell me where the owner was. I zipped the backpack open and immediately got this weird pit in my stomach. It wasn't the usual camping stuff. Inside were a bunch of strange things. A handful of old, rusty keys, a worn-out paperback book with pages folded and torn, a small, beat-up notebook with a bunch of scribbled notes but no clear words, just jumbled letters and numbers, and, oddly, a bundle of old photographs. The pictures were black and white, and they looked old. They showed people in the same forest I was in, but the photos were unsettling. The people weren't smiling or posing, just standing stiffly. One picture was of a tree with deep scratch marks on the bark, almost like claw marks, but there weren't any animals that big around here. Another photo showed a dirt trail, but you could see footprints around the edges, some big, some small, but none of the prints made any sense, like they were walking backward or sideways. I felt cold just looking at them. I put the photos aside and flipped through the notebook. The writing was all over the place, some of it in what looked like shorthand or codes. I didn't understand any of it. Then I found a page with a crudely drawn map of the area, but the landmarks didn't match where I was at all. There were weird markings, circles, and arrows pointing to spots that didn't exist, at least not on the trail maps I had. That's when I realized something was off. Whoever this was, they knew this forest better than anyone. But the backpack wasn't theirs. They'd left it here for a reason. I put everything back in and zipped it closed, staring around for any sign of a person. Still nothing. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing noises, branches snapping, twigs crunching. At first, I thought it was just animals or the wind, but the sounds didn't match. Some of the steps were too deliberate, too close. Like someone was walking around my tent, watching. I shined my flashlight out a few times, but all I saw were trees and shadows. No one. The flashlight beam caught nothing moving except a few squirrels scurrying up a tree. The next morning, I woke up early, planning to pack up and leave. But when I went outside, the backpack was gone. I was relieved at first, thinking whoever left it finally came back to get it. But then I noticed something else, a trail of small, muddy footprints leading away from my tent into the woods. The footprints were fresh, and they weren't mine. I followed them, but they disappeared after about 50 feet. I kept walking, trying to find anything or anyone, but there was nothing. The forest was silent again, like it swallowed the footsteps whole. I went back to my campsite, heart pounding, and packed up fast. As I was getting ready to leave, I found a small, folded note tucked under a rock near where the backpack had been. It was a single sentence written in shaky handwriting, "Don't trust the quiet." I stuffed the note in my pocket and didn't look back until I was well out of the park, driving down the highway under the bright sunlight, feeling like something had been watching me the whole time, waiting for me to notice. The first thing I noticed that afternoon was a pair of worn-out sneakers lying in the dirt about 50 feet from my campsite. They were just there, half buried in leaves like someone had kicked them off and walked away. At first, I thought maybe a kid or a hiker had left them behind by accident. It didn't seem that weird people forget stuff all the time. But then I saw more. Scattered a few feet from the shoes were some torn jeans, a shirt, and even a jacket. The clothes were all spread out along a rough path leading straight toward my tent. I hadn't heard anyone come in or out, no voices or footsteps, just the usual quiet of the forest. I stepped closer, feeling a weird mix of confusion and something else I couldn't put my finger on. The clothes looked old, dirty, like someone had been wearing them for days, maybe longer. There was no sign of the person who'd been in them. No footprints other than my own, no broken branches or anything that said someone had passed through recently. I called out a few times. "Hey, is anyone there?" No answer. Just the wind shaking the leaves in the trees. I told myself maybe it was some kind of weird prank or a mistake. Maybe someone had left their stuff behind and went back to the trailhead or something. But it didn't feel right. The clothes weren't in a pile like they'd been dropped, they were spaced out, like someone had taken them off one by one and moved deeper into the woods. I went back to my tent, trying not to let it get to me. I was camping alone for a few days, just trying to disconnect from work and the city noise. My plan was to spend a couple of nights here, nothing fancy, just me, the forest, and my little fire pit. That night, I kept hearing noises. At first, it was just the usual sounds, the wind, howls, a few branches cracking under what I assumed were animals. But as the hours went on, I noticed something else, footsteps. Crunching leaves and twigs snapping, slowly circling my tent, always just outside the light from my campfire. I shined my flashlight out into the dark, scanning the trees, but I never saw anyone. The light caught nothing moving except the occasional rabbit or maybe a raccoon. Still, the footsteps kept going, slow and deliberate, circling around like someone was watching me. I didn't want to believe it, but I had the growing sense that someone was out there, just watching, waiting. It wasn't a sudden thing, like a scream or a shout. It was the quiet kind of fear that comes from not knowing what's out there, but knowing it's close. The next morning, I found more clothes along the same path. This time, there was a jacket, some socks, and even a hat, all left behind like breadcrumbs leading somewhere. But no person. No sign of anyone walking away from the camp. I checked my phone, no signal, of course, but I snapped a picture of the clothes anyway, just in case. I felt like I should leave, but part of me wanted to figure out what was going on. Was someone injured? Running from something? Or was this some kind of trap? That afternoon, I went for a hike, trying to clear my head. I followed the path where the clothes ended, hoping to find some clue. The trail was faint, and the forest was thick, but I kept going for about half a mile. Then I saw footprints. Barefoot, dragging marks, like someone was limping or dragging something. I followed the prints for a bit, but they disappeared near a small creek, swallowed up by mud and water. That night was worse. The footsteps came back, louder this time, closer. I couldn't sleep. Every time I shined my flashlight outside, there was nothing but shadows and empty trees. I could hear breathing sometimes, but I couldn't tell if it was mine or someone else's. I started to feel trapped. I kept my phone on me, even though I knew there was no signal, just for comfort. I stayed close to the fire, throwing logs on to keep the light and heat up. Then, around midnight, I heard a voice. Not yelling or screaming, just a soft whisper from somewhere outside the trees. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded like a woman. I called back, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. I grabbed my backpack and started packing, deciding to leave first thing in the morning. But right as I was rolling up my sleeping bag, I heard footsteps running, fast and heavy, coming through the brush. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. A figure burst out of the trees, a woman, covered in dirt and scratches. She looked terrified, wild-eyed. She didn't say anything, just kept running toward the camp. I didn't know what to do at first. I wanted to help her, but also felt frozen, like I was trying to understand if she was dangerous or needed help. She collapsed near the fire, shaking, gasping for breath. I sat down beside her, handed her some water. She just kept looking around, like she thought someone else was coming. She finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "You're the only one here?" I nodded, trying to keep calm. She said, They took my things. Made me leave everything behind. I don't know where they went. I didn't ask who they were. It didn't seem like the time. I told her I'd call for help once we got out, but the park was huge, and getting a signal was hit or miss. We decided to pack up and leave together first thing in the morning. The rest of the night, the forest felt heavier. Every noise made me jump. I kept the fire going, but it was hard to relax. At dawn, we packed everything and started hiking back toward the trailhead. The woman wouldn't say much, just kept looking over her shoulder. About halfway down the trail, I saw signs of other people, footprints, broken branches, but no one in sight. The feeling that we were being watched never left. When we finally reached the ranger station, I got a weak signal and called the park rangers. They took her in, said they'd look into it. I never found out exactly what happened to her, but something about the clothes, the trail, and the way she appeared made me realize I'd been close to something really bad out there. I left the park that day, not looking back. The first night I noticed them, I thought it was just a coincidence. I was sitting by my campfire, the orange glow flickering against the trees, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Across the clearing, at the next campsite over, there was a group of people, 4 or 5, maybe, just standing there, watching. Not talking, not moving much, just staring at my fire. At first, I figured maybe they were new campers, just settling in, or maybe they were waiting for something. But there was something off about it. The way they stood, rigid, like statues, faces blank in the shadows. They didn't even blink much. I called out a quick hey, figuring maybe they needed help or something, but no one answered. No movement. Just the firelight reflecting off their eyes. I shrugged it off and went back to roasting some marshmallows, trying not to let it bother me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those silent faces. I told myself they were probably harmless. Maybe they were shy, or just tired. The next evening, same thing. As soon as it got dark, they were back, same spot, same silent staring. I tried waving, even smiled, but nothing. I checked my gear, triple-checked my locks and 10 zippers, but I wasn't really worried. Just a little weirded out. On the third night, I noticed something else. One of them, a guy who looked older, maybe in his 50s, had his head tilted slightly as if studying me. His eyes caught the firelight differently, almost too focused. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. That's when I realized they hadn't spoken a word the entire time. I started keeping my phone close, though the signal was weak. I took pictures, but every time I looked at them later, their faces were too dark to see clearly. It was like the camera couldn't catch who they really were. The fourth night, I got bolder and walked over to their campfire, keeping a safe distance. I said, "Hey, do you guys need anything? Water? Directions?" Still no response. Just silence. There was something so unnatural about the silence, like they'd made a pact not to speak. Their eyes never left me, but they didn't move to meet me either. I went back to my site feeling a mix of frustration and unease. Why would someone just watch you like that without saying anything? It felt like they were waiting for me to do something, but I didn't know what. The fifth night, things got worse. While I was cooking dinner, I heard footsteps crunching in the leaves behind me. I turned fast, but no one was there. Then from the corner of the clearing, I saw one of them, maybe the youngest, a woman, step a few feet closer to my fire. Still no words, just that blank stare. I backed away slowly toward my tent, heart pounding. She didn't follow, but didn't leave either. Just stood there, watching. That's when I started noticing small things. When I left my tent to grab water, they'd be standing closer to my site than before. When I turned around, they'd freeze like statues again. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of weird camping tradition or a prank. Maybe they were just lonely and trying to connect without talking. But that didn't explain why they never moved except to inch closer every night. On the sixth night, I barely slept. The quiet was crushing. Every little noise made me tense up. I kept my flashlight on and my pocket knife ready. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of breathing. Heavy, slow, coming from just outside my tent. I froze, staring at the thin fabric wall. Then I saw shadows moving, figures edging closer. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. The breathing stopped. I reached for my phone, but no signal. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping on the tent pole. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. It was right next to my head. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it outside. For faces were pressed close to the mesh, eyes wide and unblinking. No mouths moving. No words. I screamed, threw open the tent flap, and they scattered into the dark like ghosts. The next morning, I packed everything up fast. On my way out, I told the ranger what happened. She looked concerned but said she'd never heard of a group like that camping here. I didn't look back once I got in my car and drove away. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I'm sure of one thing: some things are better left alone in the dark. I was driving late at night on this backcountry road in the middle of nowhere. I had planned a weekend camping trip, but the weather was rough, rainy, foggy, the kind that messes with your visibility. I'd been following the GPS, which kept rerouting me through some narrow forest roads, but then, out of nowhere, I heard this loud pop. My tire blew. I pulled over as best I could, but it was tricky, the shoulder was muddy, the trees were close, and the rain was starting to pick up. I grabbed my spare and the jack from the trunk, but the ground was slippery and uneven. While I was working on the tire, I checked my phone. No signal. Great. I figured I'd have to wait for help. The only light was from the faint glow of my car's interior, and the rain was tapping steadily on the roof. After I got the spare on, I thought I'd drive back the way I came to find some better spot with service. But when I started the engine and looked ahead, everything was thick forest. No real road. Just trees and mud. I didn't remember the road ending like that. I got out to look around, hoping I was just missing something. The rain blurred the edges of the trees, and the fog was thick, clinging to the ground like smoke. No sign of a road. The GPS was useless, just a blinking red dot stuck in the middle of the forest. I was about to get back in the car when I saw headlights through the trees, a set of bright beams cutting through the fog. A car pulled up slowly, stopped about 20 feet away, and the engine cut off. I couldn't tell what kind it was, just the shape. A man stepped out. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark jacket with the hood up, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was pale in the light, with sharp features and cold eyes that didn't quite meet mine. He called out, "You okay there?" I said I'd had a flat and lost signal. I asked if he knew the way back to the main road. He nodded slowly, didn't say much, just said, "I can give you a ride." I hesitated. The rain was getting worse. My spare was only a temporary fix, and I didn't want to be stuck here all night. But then, I told him I didn't see a road, and he just shrugged like it was no big deal. "Follow me," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something that made my skin crawl, like he expected me to just trust him. I didn't really have a choice, though. No signal, no road, no other cars. I got into his car. It was old, the leather seats cracked and worn, the dashboard covered in dust. He didn't offer his name, just started driving, headlights piercing through the fog. At first, the road was dirt and uneven, then it narrowed down even more, twisting between trees that brushed the sides of the car. I kept trying to look for signs of civilization, anything that said road, but there was nothing. Just thick forest. After a few minutes, I asked, "Are you sure this goes anywhere?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept driving slowly. Then he said, "You won't find it on a map." That made my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" He didn't say more. Just kept his eyes on the road or whatever this path was. I tried to call someone again. No signal. We drove like that for what felt like forever, twisting through the trees, sometimes the tires slipping on the wet mud. The man was quiet, except for the occasional grunt or sigh. I was gripping the edge of my seat, feeling like I was sinking deeper into some trap. At one point, the car slowed down more and more until it just stopped. We were in a little clearing, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. "Where are we?" I asked. He looked over, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Close to safety." I wanted to ask where exactly, but the words stuck in my throat. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, another car, parked in the shadows, like it had been waiting. The man glanced briefly toward it but said nothing. I felt panic rising. I told him I wanted to call someone, to use my phone again. No signal. That's when I noticed his hands were clenched tight on the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. "Look, I don't know what this place is, or why you're taking me here," I said, voice shaking, "but I want out." He turned to me then, really looked at me for the first time, like weighing something. "You don't understand. You shouldn't be out here. Not alone." I said, "I'm not going to stay in this car. I'm walking." He laughed softly, a cold, low sound. "You won't last." I got out, door slammed behind me, rain soaking me instantly. I started walking toward the faint glow I'd seen through the trees earlier. It looked like a building, a house, maybe? The man watched me from the car but didn't move. I kept walking, boots squishing in the mud, heart pounding in my ears. After a few minutes, I found a dirt road. Not marked, just a narrow path, but definitely a road. I took off running, not looking back. I heard the car start up behind me, tires on dirt, but I didn't stop. I ran until I hit a small town road with streetlights. I pulled out my phone and finally got signal. I called 911 and the police showed up not long after. The man? Turns out he was known around there, a drifter with a bad record for grabbing people and taking them somewhere nobody found them again. He'd been missing for a while. I never figured out exactly how he got to me so fast or where that weird road was that he drove me down, but I know I don't want to be that lost again. That night, I learned sometimes help doesn't come from who you expect, and sometimes the roads you think you're on don't lead anywhere safe. I went camping by myself that weekend, just trying to get away from everything for a bit. Nothing fancy, just a small state park a few hours from my place, nothing crowded, no cell signal to bother me. I like that kind of solitude sometimes, you know? Just me, the trees, and whatever wildlife wants to hang out. I got there in the afternoon, picked a spot near a little creek, the kind of place that felt quiet but not totally isolated. I set up my tent, started a fire, cooked some food. The usual. Everything felt calm, peaceful even. The sky was clear when I went to sleep, stars out, cool air. Perfect. I woke up around 3 a.m. because something felt off. The usual night sounds, the crickets, the occasional owl were there, but quieter than normal. Almost like someone had turned down the volume. I listened for a minute and noticed something else, the faint crunch of branches, like footsteps moving just outside the edge of the campsite. I figured maybe it was a deer or some other animal, but I kept my eyes open. I looked outside my tent, but the moon was just a sliver, and the shadows were thick. I couldn't see anything for sure, just some dark shapes moving slowly among the trees. I thought maybe it was another camper walking around, but I hadn't seen anyone else there, and this wasn't a busy weekend. I lay back down but kept hearing those slow steps, now circling around the campsite. It wasn't fast or loud, just steady, deliberate. I wasn't scared yet, but I didn't like the feeling of being watched. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, the sun was just coming up, and I went outside to stretch and check my gear. That's when I saw them. Saplings, small, freshly cut little trees, were stuck into the ground all around my campsite. They formed a perfect circle, blocking every exit, maybe 6 or 7 feet away from the tent. Each sapling looked like it had been snapped or cut cleanly, the fresh green still vibrant, the ends sharp and wet looking. I swear I hadn't seen any of them when I went to sleep. The ground around them was soft, like they'd been planted recently, and the earth was still disturbed. Whoever did this had been there in the middle of the night, making sure I couldn't just walk out. I started walking the circle, looking for gaps or places I could slip through, but it was tight. Not the kind of thing you accidentally do by throwing some branches on the ground. This was deliberate. I wanted to laugh it off, maybe say it was some weird prank by another camper, but there was no sign of anyone else around. No footprints or trash or anything to suggest I wasn't alone. Just those saplings, planted in a perfect ring like some kind of cage. I called my phone, no signal. Figures. I thought about hiking out, but the ground was muddy, and the forest was thick past the saplings. It looked like whoever had done this didn't want me leaving anytime soon. I gathered some of the saplings and tried to pull them up, but the roots had been jammed deep enough to hold. I even tried breaking a few, but that took more effort than I expected. They weren't just tossed there. Someone had really done this carefully. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps. Slow, steady, outside the ring, but now coming from all around me, not just one direction. I looked up, heart beating faster, but I still couldn't see anything in the trees. Just the faint noise of someone walking, circling, watching. I sat down on a log near the fire pit and tried to think. I kept telling myself maybe it was just someone passing through or a hunter who thought they were being funny, but the quiet was too intense. No birds singing, no squirrels rustling. Just footsteps and my own breathing. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, but I didn't dare leave the circle. I stayed close to my tent, watching the edges, waiting for movement. At one point, I saw a shadow flicker between the trees, just a glimpse, but enough to know someone was there. That's when the first voice spoke. Quiet, barely a whisper, but clear. You shouldn't be here. I froze. The voice came from the tree line. No face appeared, no figure stepped forward, just the words hanging in the air. I'm not bothering anyone, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The silence stretched. Then the footsteps started again, slower now, fading away. I realized I was trapped, no phone signal, no clear way out, and someone watching me from the woods. The saplings blocked every exit, like a fence made of green spikes. Whoever it was didn't want me leaving. I spent the day watching, waiting. I rationed my water and tried to stay calm. At night, I kept the fire burning, hoping the smoke would scare anything off. But the footsteps never stopped. They circled, pacing, just out of sight. I found a sharp stick and sharpened it into a crude spear, just in case. I kept telling myself if anyone tried to come in, I'd be ready. But no one made a move, just watched. The next morning, I decided I had to get out. I tested the saplings again, looking for the weakest point. After an hour, I found one that wasn't as firmly planted. I yanked it free and started breaking a small gap in the circle. That's when I heard a voice again, this time closer. You really think you can leave? It was a man's voice, low and steady. No anger, just calm. I scanned the tree line and finally saw him, mid-40s, plain clothes, standing behind a tree, watching me. I held my makeshift spear tight, backing away slowly. He stepped into the clearing, hands raised like he meant no harm. This is private land. You're not supposed to camp here. I told him I'd pay for a permit and showed him the paperwork. He didn't look at it. Just said, you shouldn't be here. People get hurt. I asked who he meant, but he didn't answer. Instead, he said, you need to leave. I told him I was going now. He just nodded, stepped back into the trees, and disappeared. I finished breaking the saplings and hurried out of the circle, not stopping until I reached the park road. I flagged down a passing car and asked for help. When the police came, I told them about the saplings and the man. They said they knew about a guy who patrolled the area, sort of a self-appointed guardian of the woods. Someone who didn't like strangers and made sure they didn't stick around. I didn't hang around to meet him again. I drove away, the saplings and footsteps and quiet watching fading behind me. But I didn't camp alone after that, not really. Ask ChatGPT. I was out camping alone one weekend at this state park I'd been to a few times before. Nothing fancy, just me, my gear, and the woods. I usually like going solo, it's peaceful, and there's no one around to bother you. The spot I picked was near a small creek, kind of tucked away from the main trail. I set up my tent, built a fire, and settled in for the night. I'd been there a few hours when I decided to stretch my legs and take a quick walk around the area before dark. The sun was dipping low, turning the trees golden. That's when I saw a tent about 200 feet from my camp, partially hidden behind a cluster of pine trees. It looked out of place. I hadn't heard or seen anyone else when I arrived, and there weren't any signs of other campers nearby. The tent wasn't like a makeshift thing either. It was one of those good, solid four-season tents, still zipped up. I thought maybe someone had come and left already, but I couldn't see a fire pit or any trash around it. Curious, I walked over. The tent looked fine from the outside, but the zipper was half open, like someone left in a hurry. I peeked inside and saw a backpack sitting near the entrance. No sleeping bags, no shoes, nothing else. Just a pack. I called out a couple of times, "Hey, you around?" Nothing. No rustling, no response. It felt weird, like the place had been abandoned suddenly. I decided to check the backpack. It wasn't locked, so I unzipped it a little. Inside were some clothes, a water bottle, and a small first aid kit. Nothing that gave away any clues about who the person might be. No phone, no wallet, no ID. At that point, I felt a little uneasy, but figured maybe the owner had gone for a hike or something. I closed the tent and headed back to my own site. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Usually, I'd hear frogs or crickets, but this time it was just silence. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but I kept glancing toward where I'd seen the tent. Around midnight, I heard something, a faint crunching of leaves, like someone was walking softly near my campsite. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the dark, but I didn't see anything. The sound stopped. The next morning, I went back to check on the abandoned tent. It was still there, exactly as I left it. No signs of movement, no footprints leading away. I looked around carefully and noticed something strange. The grass around the tent was pressed down, but in a weird way, like someone had been sitting there for hours but never left footprints outside the immediate area. I felt like I was being watched. The feeling was hard to explain, but it was there. I didn't see anyone, but every time I looked toward the tree line, I thought I caught a shadow moving just beyond the light. That afternoon, I went on a hike to clear my head. I took a longer loop, but when I got back, I found fresh footprints near my tent. They didn't match mine, and they were wet, like someone had come through recently. The footprints led straight toward the abandoned tent, but after that, they disappeared. No trail, no sign of where the person went. That night, I stayed up late, keeping the fire going. I thought maybe I'd hear or see something, but nothing happened. Still, the silence felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of twigs snapping outside my tent. This time it was closer. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. There was a figure standing maybe 10 feet away, just watching. I froze. The man didn't move, didn't say anything, just stared. He was wearing dark clothes, a hood pulled up. I felt my heart hammering, but I kept quiet. After what felt like forever, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I packed up as fast as I could the next morning and left. When I got back to town, I told a ranger about the tent and the footprints. They said no one had reported anyone missing, but they'd check it out. I never went back to that spot. But sometimes, when I'm out hiking, I wonder who that tent belonged to, and where they went leaving their gear behind like that, and why someone was watching me in the dark, so close but never making a sound. I was hiking back to camp late one afternoon after spending a few hours poking around this little clearing I'd found earlier that day. The sun was dipping low, but it was still bright enough to see clearly. I had been out for maybe 6 hours total, just me, my backpack, some trail mix, and a couple of water bottles. Nothing fancy. The kind of trip where you just want to get away from everything, you know? The trail I was on was narrow, surrounded by thick trees on both sides. It wasn't a heavily trafficked path, more like a side trail that most people probably ignored. I liked that because it was quieter. Except that day, it didn't feel quiet at all. As I walked, I noticed how the usual forest noises seemed muted. No birds singing, no squirrels running around, just the soft crunch of my boots on the dry leaves. It was odd but not alarming, just one of those weird little things you sometimes notice in the woods. Then, as I was rounding a bend where the trees opened up a bit, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and turned my head slowly, trying not to make a scene. About 15 feet off the trail, just behind a big pine, I saw a figure standing completely still. The guy was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and his head was tilted slightly like he was watching me. We made eye contact for a few seconds, which felt way longer than it probably was. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. I blinked and looked back toward the trail, then glanced again. The figure was gone. Just like that. No rustling, no snapping twigs, nothing to show he'd moved. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. That weirdness stuck with me. I picked up my pace but tried not to rush, so I wouldn't trip on the roots sticking out of the ground. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the forest looked empty. A little farther down the trail, I noticed something else. My water bottle, the cheap plastic one I'd left hanging from my pack with a carabiner, was lying on the ground off to the side. That was weird because I hadn't dropped it. I didn't remember taking it off or anything like that. I thought maybe a branch snagged it loose while I was passing through, so I bent down to grab it. Then, just as I straightened up, I heard a soft noise of a rustle, maybe from deeper in the trees. Nothing close, but not far either. Like something was moving around in the underbrush, keeping pace with me. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. But my eyes kept scanning the woods, and every time I looked, I felt like I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye, just for a moment. I decided not to turn around anymore and kept walking toward camp. The path was getting steeper and rockier, which slowed me down, but I was eager to get back. I pulled out my phone to check the time and signal. No service, of course, but the battery was at about 40%, so I figured I could call someone as soon as I got back to camp. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows between the trees. The whole forest looked different, darker, almost like it was holding its breath. Then, not more than 10 minutes from my camp, I heard the rustling again, louder this time, like twigs snapping close by. I stopped dead, heart thumping. I called out, "Hello," but no answer. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but the beam just hit thick bushes and tree trunks. I felt exposed standing there, like I was a deer caught out in the open. Suddenly, something shifted just past the trees. I caught a glimpse of movement, barely a figure again, but I swear this time I saw the glint of eyes looking right at me. I didn't wait around. I started moving fast, almost running. My mind was racing. Maybe it was a hunter? A hiker? Or something worse? The trail was twisting and turning, and I had to watch my footing, but all I wanted was to get back to camp. When I finally saw my tent, relief hit me like a punch. I ran straight to it, grabbed my backpack, and locked the tent zipper as fast as I could. I didn't want to be outside anymore. I sat down by the fire pit, trying to steady my breathing. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I kept my flashlight on, scanning the trees around me, but there was nothing. Then I heard a voice, very low and calm, coming from just beyond the tree line. It wasn't yelling or calling, just a quiet murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely human. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my phone and tried again for service. Still nothing. I thought about packing up and hiking out right then, but the thought of walking back alone in the dark, with whoever was out there, scared me more. I stayed by the fire, building it up to keep the area lit. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, but when I focused, there was nothing. Hours passed like that. The voice never got louder, never stopped completely. It was just there, like a whisper that didn't want me to sleep. Around dawn, I heard footsteps on the dirt path approaching camp. I grabbed a big stick from the firewood pile and waited. A man stepped into the light. Same guy from earlier, I was sure of it. Dark hoodie, hands in pockets, calm face. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't say anything. He took a step forward and lowered his voice. "You're lucky I'm not one of the others." I still stayed quiet. My hand tightened around the stick. After a moment, he turned and walked away without another word. I didn't move until I heard the crunch of his steps fade into the trees. When the sun was fully up, I packed everything and left that place. I didn't stop to look back once. I got to my car 2 hours later and called the park rangers, told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to check the trail, but I never heard back. I've never gone back there since. I was camping alone up in the mountains, just a few miles from the nearest town. It was the kind of spot I liked, remote, quiet, mostly untouched. I'd been out there a couple days already, hiking during the day and sleeping in my little tent at night. Nothing fancy, just a standard setup, tent, sleeping bag, some food I packed in my backpack. I kept my food stash tied up in a plastic bag, hanging it from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground, the classic bear-proof technique you learn about in all those camping guides. I wasn't expecting bears or anything big, just being cautious. The branch was sturdy, and I figured that was enough. That first night passed fine. I was up early the next morning, ate some granola bars, refilled my water, and headed out for a hike. The woods around me were quiet, mostly just the usual bird calls and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Nothing that stood out. When I got back to camp later that evening, I noticed something weird right away. The plastic bag that was supposed to be hanging from the tree was gone. I looked up and down the branch, checked the ropes, but it was just gone. My food stash disappeared. I felt a flicker of panic but figured maybe a raccoon or some other critter had managed to get it. I searched the ground under the tree, hoping to find the bag or some of my food scattered, but there was nothing. No wrappers, no crumbs, not even a dent in the dirt. The ground looked totally undisturbed, except for a few footprints. That's when I noticed the tracks. They weren't animal prints too big and shaped like human feet. But the odd thing was, the prints looked like they were made by bare feet, and they didn't seem to come from the direction of the trail or the camp entrance. They started maybe 10 feet from my tent, kind of circled around the tree where the food was, and then disappeared into the thicker woods. That didn't make sense. Who would be walking around barefoot out here? It was mountain terrain, rocks, sticks, cold dirt. It didn't feel like the kind of place someone would walk barefoot, especially at night. I checked my tent and gear carefully. Nothing else was missing, no damage, no signs anyone had tried to get in. Just the food bag. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise of the wind, the branches scraping, an occasional animal call felt louder, more threatening. The next morning, I found more bare footprints nearby. Not a lot, just a few. They weren't deep, like the person was trying to be light on their feet. I followed them cautiously for a bit, but they led into dense forest with no trail. I didn't want to get lost or walk into something worse, so I turned back. That day, I kept checking my surroundings more than usual. Every time I heard a twig snap or a distant thump, I'd stop and look around. Nothing ever showed up, but that feeling of being watched was growing. I tried telling myself it was just paranoia. Maybe a hiker had come by, snuck in, grabbed the food, and left without me seeing. By the second night, I'd wrapped the remaining food in plastic and hung it higher up in the tree, tying the rope extra tight. I set my phone's flashlight on the ground near the tent, hoping the light might keep anyone away. But still, I couldn't stop scanning the dark forest edges, waiting for any sign. Around midnight, I woke up because I heard something. Not a loud noise, just a soft, almost imperceptible rustle. I froze, heart pounding. I didn't want to move and risk making noise. It sounded like someone walking around outside my tent, slow steps on dry leaves. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, shining it toward the sound. There was nothing but shadows and trees. Then the noise stopped. I sat there for what felt like an hour, waiting and listening. The forest was silent again. The next morning, I found more signs. Not food missing this time, but more barefoot tracks. They circled the tent in a way that made me feel trapped, like whoever it was had been watching me sleep. That's when I decided to pack up and leave. I didn't wait until daylight. I threw everything in my pack as fast as I could, not even bothering to eat. As I walked back to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, seeing shapes in the trees, shadows that weren't there when I blinked. I never figured out who was sneaking around my camp barefoot, or why they only took my food and nothing else. But I knew I didn't want to be there anymore. I left the mountains that day and haven't gone back. I was camping alone in this state park a couple years back. Nothing fancy, just me, my tent, and the usual gear. I picked a spot deep enough that the campsites weren't crowded but close enough to a trailhead so I wasn't totally off the grid. It was early fall, so nights were chilly but not freezing. That first night, everything felt normal. I'd been hiking all day and was wiped out. After dinner, I zipped myself into my sleeping bag and passed out pretty quick. The woods were quiet except for some distant owls and the wind moving through the trees. I woke up sometime around midnight to the faintest noise. It was subtle, like someone shifting their weight carefully on dry leaves. My eyes were still closed, but the sound was close, just outside the tent. I stayed perfectly still and listened. The noise came again, slow footsteps, just outside. Then something glinted in the moonlight like a knife or some metal object catching the light, but not flashing, just a dull, soft shine. It moved along the side of the tent, careful, deliberate. My heart started beating faster, but I didn't dare make a sound. I knew I hadn't left the tent flap open. I double-checked in my head, zipped tight, everything secure. The footsteps paused for a moment right near the tent. The person was close enough that I could almost feel their presence pressing against the thin fabric. Then I heard the soft scrape of metal against something hard, a blade maybe tapping against a rock or tree bark. I didn't know what to do. If I made a noise, whatever was out there might get violent. But sitting there silently, my mind raced through all the worst possibilities. After a few seconds that felt like forever, the footsteps started moving again, slower this time, back the way they came. The glint faded as the person moved into shadow. I didn't move until I heard the crunch of footsteps fading into the distance. I grabbed my phone, no signal, of course, but I checked the time, 12:37 a.m. I wanted to call the park ranger or 911, but nothing. Just dead silence on the line. I switched on my flashlight, sweeping it outside the tent, but saw nothing. No footprints in the dirt or leaves, no broken branches, nothing out of place. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. Like I wasn't alone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, listening for any noise. Morning came, and I packed up fast. When I looked around the campsite, nothing seemed disturbed except for a few small scratch marks on the tree nearest my tent, like something sharp scraped the bark. I didn't stick around. I took the trail out as fast as I could and left the park that day. I never found out who it was or why they were there. But whatever they wanted, I'm glad they didn't get inside the tent. I wasn't really looking to talk to anyone that night. I'd been hiking all day, and by the time I got to the little clearing where I set up camp, I was wiped. The trail I'd taken was supposed to be pretty quiet, but I kept noticing odd things on the way in, like the way the trees looked. I don't know, too clean? Like someone had been pruning branches, but only in the spots I passed through. It felt weird, but I just told myself it was nothing. Anyway, I finally pitched my tent near a stream, figured the water would help with the bugs and give me some background noise. I made a small fire, cooked a quick dinner, and settled in. It was late, maybe around 9 p.m., and the woods were silent except for the usual night sounds of crickets, the occasional owl. That's when I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching over dry leaves. I froze. My first thought was maybe another camper, but it was late, and the park rules said no camping outside designated sites. Plus, I hadn't seen anyone on the trail for hours. The steps stopped about 20 feet from my tent. I could hear breathing. Not panicked, just steady. Then, a voice, soft but urgent. "Hey," the person said. "Sorry to bother you. I'm kind of lost." I hesitated, peering through the mesh of the tent. The figure stepped into the weak circle of firelight. He was a guy, mid-30s maybe, wearing a wrinkled jacket and jeans. His hair was messy, like he'd been outside for a while. But his eyes, they never quite met mine. They flicked around like he was watching something behind me or just avoiding me completely. "Lost?" I said. "Where are you trying to get?" He shrugged. "Anywhere but here, I guess." I don't know. I've been walking for hours. I wanted to say no, to tell him I didn't want trouble. But something about the way he talked made me uneasy, like he was rehearsing what to say. So I unzipped the tent a little. "You can warm up by the fire," I said, voice careful. He nodded and moved closer, but still no eye contact. It felt off, like he wasn't really there. His hands twitched, fingers gripping and releasing like he was nervous. I started asking questions. Where did he come from? How did he get lost? Did he have a phone? But his answers were vague, sometimes contradicting what he'd said a minute before. He said he was hiking but didn't know the trail names. He said he had a phone but no signal. Then I noticed his shoes were clean, almost new. Not what you'd expect from someone wandering lost in the woods. I kept watching him, feeling like I was missing something. The woods were still quiet except for the fire crackling and the occasional rustle of leaves. But then I caught the faint smell of something sharp, like metal or oil. I told him I was going to bed soon. He said he understood but didn't move away. He just stared at the fire, hands clenched. That night, I lay in the tent, the flap only partly zipped, listening. I heard him pacing around the fire, slow steps, never stopping, like a predator waiting. At one point, I heard him talking softly, but it wasn't words. Just murmurs, like he was practicing or psyching himself up. Then, a sound I'll never forget, the scrape of metal against rock. I sat up, heart pounding. I unzipped the tent fully and grabbed my flashlight. He was standing near a big rock, holding a pocket knife. The blade caught the light, shining cold. "Why do you have that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up suddenly, eyes locking on mine for the first time. Not lost, not scared, just empty. Like a predator's stare. "I need to get somewhere," he said, voice low. I backed away slowly, but he took a step closer. I grabbed my backpack, ready to run. That's when he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a slow, chilling curl of his lips. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, "but I will if I have to." I took off running into the woods, not looking back. I heard him behind me, footsteps pounding. I stumbled, but kept going. After what felt like forever, I saw lights ahead at the ranger station. I burst through the door, slamming it shut. The ranger looked up, startled. "There's a guy out there," I said, breathless. "He's got a knife." They called the sheriff, but when the officers arrived, there was no sign of the man. I never went back to that park. But sometimes I wonder what he was really doing out there and if he's still watching. The night I noticed my lantern was gone is one of those little things that, looking back, made everything feel wrong, even before I really knew something was off. I was camping alone in this state park I'd never been to before, a small spot deep enough in the woods that my phone barely got a signal. Nothing fancy, just me, a tent, a cooler, and my old lantern I bought years ago. I liked it because it was reliable and simple, just the way I wanted things when I was out there. The night before, I'd set it right next to my sleeping bag after I'd used it to read for a while. I remember thinking I'd double check it in the morning, but by the time I woke up, it was just gone. I didn't panic at first. I figured maybe I'd knocked it off the little table I'd set up and it rolled somewhere nearby, under a bush or behind a rock. So I grabbed my flashlight and started looking around. The light cut through the dark and long, shaky beams, but I couldn't find it anywhere close to my campsite. That's when I started noticing things. First, the weird silence. The woods had been noisy earlier in the evening, frogs, cicadas, the occasional bird call, but now it was unnervingly quiet. Even the wind had died down. No rustling leaves, no distant animal sounds. Just this heavy, oppressive stillness that made me want to move faster. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the bugs had stopped for the night or the animals had gone quiet. But then I heard it. Not a loud noise, just this faint, dragging sound coming from the trees about 50 yards away. Like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I froze, heart beating faster, and swung the flashlight beam toward the noise. Nothing. Just the dark, thick woods. I moved closer, stepping carefully, trying not to make any sound. The dragging noise stopped as soon as I got near, but then I noticed something on the ground, tiny scratches in the dirt. They looked like they'd been made by nails or claws, but they were human-shaped, like fingertips dragged sideways. I crouched down to look closer, shining my light on the marks. They led deeper into the trees, in a weird zigzag pattern, as if someone had been backing away slowly. That's when my stomach started twisting. I didn't want to be out there anymore. I turned back toward the campsite, but my lantern was still missing. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to shake off the feeling. Later, I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing sounds of branches snapping, leaves crunching just outside my tent. Every time I poked my head out, there was nothing. No eyes watching, no shapes moving. Just empty woods. In the early morning, Before dawn, I decided to take one last look for the lantern. I figured maybe I'd dropped it further than I thought. I followed the scratch marks again, moving slowly along the path they'd made. About 100 yards from camp, I spotted it, my lantern. It was lying on the forest floor, far away from where I'd left it. But something was wrong. The glass globe was cracked open, like it had been pried or smashed. Inside the broken lantern, I saw more scratches. They weren't just random. They looked deliberate, like someone had carved shapes or letters into the inside glass. I couldn't make sense of it at first, but after staring for a long time, I thought maybe it was initials, or some kind of crude message. I didn't have the nerve to get closer to look properly. The whole thing felt like a warning, but from who? Or what? I took the lantern and got out of there fast. Back in my car, I called the park office. They said no one reported any missing gear or strange activity, but that there'd been a couple of complaints about a guy wandering near campsites the last few days. I never saw him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was the one messing with my stuff. I packed up and left that same day, not looking back. The scratches on the lantern stayed with me though, and I still wonder what they meant. I was camping alone in the national forest, not the most remote place, but far enough out that cell service was patchy at best. It was late summer, and I'd picked a spot near a small creek, a quiet little clearing surrounded by thick trees. The kind of place you hope nobody else finds for miles. I set up my tent just before dusk and settled in with some snacks and a book, planning to stay the night. The air was warm but starting to cool as the sun dipped below the trees. I remember hearing birds and the usual sounds of the forest, crickets, frogs, leaves rustling in the wind. Nothing unusual. Around 9 p.m., when it was dark but not totally black, I sat outside the tent with my headlamp on, reading. That's when I heard it. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling out for help. It wasn't screaming or panicked, more like a calm but desperate plea, repeating the same words over and over. Please, someone help me. I froze. The voice came from the direction of the creek, maybe 100 yards away, but it felt way closer. The way she said it was so steady, like she was trapped or stuck, but not yelling for attention. Just repeating the phrase like a broken recording. I got up and grabbed my flashlight, the beam shaky in my hand. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" No answer. I started walking toward the sound, careful not to trip on roots or rocks. The voice repeated again, same words, same calm tone. Please, someone help me. I kept shining the light ahead, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever it was, but there was nothing. No movement, no shadow, no one in sight. Just trees and underbrush. At one point, the voice seemed to get quieter, but then it was right behind me, like someone had moved closer without me noticing. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly into the woods. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was some kind of prank or a weird echo bouncing off the creek and trees, but the words were too clear, too deliberate. And it didn't sound like any of the usual wildlife noises. I went back to camp to grab my phone, hoping for a better signal to call for help, but of course, there was none. I figured I'd try to find whoever it was myself, or at least see if someone was hurt. As I followed the voice again, it repeated those same words. Not a single change, like someone stuck on a loop. I moved slowly, every little sound, twigs snapping, leaves crunching, making me jump. The forest felt alive in this different way, like I was being watched. At one point, I stopped and listened closely. The crying voice was definitely human, but something felt off about it. The way it stayed so steady, so quiet, almost like it was being played through a speaker or from a phone. but I didn't see or hear anything electronic. The trail led me toward a shallow depression near the creek, where I found a small, broken branch and some crushed grass, like someone had been there recently but left in a hurry. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, are you here? I want to help." The voice repeated. "Please, someone help me." No matter where I shined the flashlight, there was no sign of anyone. I kept circling the area, the voice following me, always just out of sight. Then, the strangest thing happened. The voice suddenly stopped. Just silence. No more pleading. Just the forest noises again. I waited, holding my breath, scanning the trees. Nothing. I decided to head back to camp, feeling uneasy. As I walked back, I heard footsteps behind me, soft, careful, matching my pace. I dared to glance but didn't see anyone. My heart pounded, and I started walking faster. The footsteps matched me. I broke into a run, not looking back until I was at my tent, fumbling to zip it closed. Once inside, I heard nothing. I stayed up the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, every noise outside making me tense. In the morning, I packed up and left, not staying to figure out what had happened. I never heard that voice again, but I couldn't explain what I heard or why no one was there. Some things just don't make sense. I was camping by myself for a few days in this state park a couple hours from home. I'd been there a few times before, mostly weekend trips to get out of the city and just clear my head. Nothing fancy, just a tent, some food, and a couple of books. The spot I picked was pretty secluded, tucked into a dense patch of woods near a small lake. I liked it because it was quiet and you could hear the water lapping against the shore if you sat still long enough. The first day was normal enough. I set up my tent, unpacked my gear, and made a fire pit. I always like to do a quick walk around the area just to get familiar with it, you know? Check the trails, see what's around, make sure I'm not camping somewhere weird. I noticed a few trees with initials carved in the bark, but that's common in parks, people leave marks all the time. I didn't pay much attention. That night, I got out of the tent to check the fire around 10 p.m. The moon was low, casting shadows through the trees. I noticed something odd. Right next to my tent, on a tree I was pretty sure was bare of any carvings the day before, someone had carved JM into the bark. My initials. I have a pretty uncommon set, so this stood out. I figured maybe I was mistaken and had walked past it earlier without noticing, but I was almost positive the tree was clean. I didn't think much of it, could be a coincidence. Maybe a previous camper with the same initials. I didn't worry. The next day, I went on a longer hike around the area. When I came back late afternoon, I noticed more carvings JM on several trees within 100 feet of my campsite. None of them looked fresh. Some were older, weathered, and others had only the bark just barely cut. What caught my attention was the handwriting style. It was very deliberate, neat, almost like cursive letters. Not like the usual random scrapes or initials you see in the woods. But the handwriting didn't match mine at all. I know my own handwriting, especially my initials, and this was different. It looked like someone else's. That unsettled me. I thought about telling the ranger, but I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound outside the tent made me tense. I kept glancing out through the mesh window, trying to spot anything moving in the dark. The forest felt different, heavier somehow. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint scraping noise. It was soft, rhythmic, like someone running their fingernails over bark or slowly dragging a knife against wood. I sat up in the tent, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the edge of the clearing, just beyond the fire pit. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam cut through the darkness, swinging slowly. Nothing. The scraping stopped as soon as I opened the tent. I tried to convince myself it was just a branch rubbing against another tree in the wind. But the forest was still, no wind at all. I checked the area around the campsite, shining the flashlight on the nearest trees. Nothing new, no fresh carvings. I even walked to the edge of the clearing, shining the light in the shadows, but didn't see or hear anything. I went back to bed but didn't sleep well. The next morning, I found another carving, this time on a tree closer to the trail I'd used to leave. The initials were the same, JM, but the cuts were fresh, raw, and looked like whoever did it had done it recently. It wasn't deep, but definitely new. I packed up and headed into town to get some supplies and get a little signal on my phone. While I was there, I stopped at the ranger station to ask about the carvings. The ranger, a woman in her late 40s, looked concerned when I showed her pictures I'd taken. "That's unusual," she said. "We get the typical initials and dates here and there, but never someone carving the same set over and over in a small area. Usually, it's different campers marking their spot, but not the same letters." She asked if I'd noticed anyone suspicious or any strange activity. I told her about the noises I'd heard and the feeling of being watched. She nodded slowly and said, "We've had reports recently of people hiking around, but no one official. Sometimes, people get obsessed with other campers, marking their territory. It's creepy, but usually harmless if you don't engage." I left feeling uneasy. That night back at camp, I was extra alert. I kept my phone close, charged a little, and had my knife on the ground next to my sleeping bag. Around midnight, the scraping noise came again. Louder this time. It was definitely someone carving into the bark. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and shined the light toward the noise. I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving quickly between the trees. I shouted, "Hey! Stop!" No answer. I got out of the tent and tried to follow, but the woods were thick and the figure disappeared fast. I didn't chase too far, didn't want to get lost or hurt. Back at the tent, I checked the trees again. The latest carving looked deeper and sharper than before. Whoever it was getting bolder. That's when I noticed something else, footprints. Barefoot, smallish, pressed into the soft earth near my tent and along the trail to the carvings. No shoes, no boots, just bare feet. Who walks barefoot in the woods at night? I didn't see anything else, no trash, no dropped items, no signs of a campfire. The next day, I packed up early and told the ranger I was leaving. She suggested I report it to the police just in case, but I wasn't sure what they could do. Driving away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following. Nothing. I still don't know who carved those initials or why. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the letters were. The barefoot prints are what really freaked me out, like whoever did it wanted me to see but not get close. I never went back. I was camping with my friend Chris one weekend at this remote spot we'd found a few years back. It was about a 3-hour drive out of town, past some dirt roads and logging trails, deep enough that the cell signal was barely a whisper. We liked it because it was quiet, too quiet sometimes, and you could forget about everything. No traffic, no noise, just trees and the occasional bird or squirrel. We got there just before sunset, set up the tent near a small clearing with a little fire pit someone had built before. The place was perfect, at least it seemed that way. We made a fire, cooked some hot dogs, and sat around it with a couple of beers, talking about work and nonsense, like usual. The night air was cool, but not cold, with a light breeze that rustled the branches overhead. After a while, we decided to turn in. We doused the fire with water, careful to put it out completely. Chris was pretty serious about that. We zipped up the tent, rolled out our sleeping bags, and settled down. The woods were silent, except for the occasional crack of a twig or a distant hoot from an owl. Around midnight, I woke up. I don't know why exactly, maybe the cold, maybe a noise, but something felt off. The tent was darker than I expected. I reached for my phone, but no signal. Then I noticed a faint smell of smoke, but not like a campfire. It was sharper, like something burning. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. That's when I saw it. The fire was gone. Not just out, completely vanished. No ashes, no smoke rising, just cold, dark dirt where the fire had been. It was like someone had come in and erased it. Chris stood beside me and sat up, rubbing his eyes. What the hell? I put the fire out. Yeah, me too, I said. But it's like it was never there. Then I noticed something else. Footprints. They circled the tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet out, about a foot away from the tent's base all the way around. They were clear, fresh impressions in the dirt, but none of them looked like our boots. I stared at them, counting. There were about a dozen prints. I glanced down at my boots, then Chris's. They didn't match. His were bigger, mine smaller. The prints were in between those sizes, but with a weird shape, like someone had been wearing shoes with thick soles, but the tread was smooth, no pattern. More like work boots, but worn down, or maybe sneakers with the tread worn flat. Chris crouched next to the footprints, shining his flashlight on them. Those aren't ours. No shit, I said, feeling the hair on my neck stand up. We both went around the tent, flashlight beams cutting through the dark, trying to spot any sign of whoever made them. There was nothing else. No other tracks leading in or out. Just those prints in a perfect circle. We looked at each other, and Chris said, maybe an animal? No way, I said. Those are definitely human footprints. We didn't say much after that. We sat quietly in the tent, lights off, ears straining for any noise. But everything was dead silent except for the occasional breeze. No snapping twigs, no voices, no breathing sounds. I tried to brush it off. Maybe someone was out here earlier and came back to check on the fire. But it felt weird, too deliberate. Like the fire being gone and the footprints were a message, not an accident. The next morning, I woke first and stepped outside. The footprints were still there, but the sun was starting to dry the dirt and soften them. I scanned the woods all around, looking for anything unusual. About 50 yards away, near some bushes, I saw a scrap of paper stuck to a branch. I pulled it free and unfolded it. It was blank. Chris came out and looked over my shoulder. That's creepy. Yeah, I said. Who leaves a blank note? We packed up quickly after that and took a different trail out. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole way back to the car, feeling like someone was watching us, but I never saw anything. We told a couple friends about it later, and they said maybe some drunk campers playing a prank. But the footprints were too fresh and precise. And that blank note? It didn't make any sense. I've camped a bunch since then, but I never went back to that spot. There was just something about those footprints and that missing fire that didn't add up. Like whoever was out there wasn't just passing through, they wanted me to notice. And I did. I never thought I'd have a story like this. I'm not someone who gets freaked out by much, but this one time, camping alone turned into something I didn't see coming at all. It started pretty normal. I was out in this state park, a place I'd been to a bunch of times before. It's remote enough to feel like you're way out in the middle of nowhere, but not so far that it's dangerous. The campsite itself was nothing special, just a dirt clearing, a fire ring, a picnic table, and the usual bear-proof trash can. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and started a fire. The usual stuff. It was late afternoon when I got there, so I had a few hours of daylight to relax and get everything set up. I didn't see anyone else around, but I wasn't surprised. Midweek in the fall, not a lot of people camping. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird or rustle of leaves. I liked it that way. After dark, I was sitting by the fire, just scrolling through my phone, enjoying the warmth. That's when I noticed something weird. My phone started buzzing with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I wasn't expecting any messages, no one knew where I was, and I hadn't told anyone my campsite number. The message had a photo attached. I looked at it, confused. It was my fire, exactly how it looked at that moment, the flames flickering, shadows dancing on the trees. I froze. How the hell did someone take that photo? I looked around, but the whole place was dark except for my campfire. No one was near me. The message underneath said, "You're not as alone as you think." My heart started pounding, but I told myself maybe it was some kind of prank or coincidence. Maybe a hunter or another camper somewhere nearby, just messing around. I didn't respond, just locked my phone and kept staring into the fire. Minutes passed. I heard a twig snap somewhere to my left. I turned my head quickly, but nothing was there. Just trees and shadows. The fire crackled, but everything felt heavier, like the air was thicker. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a deer or some animal. But then my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, no photo. Just words, "I'm watching." I swallowed hard. I looked around again, flashlight in hand, sweeping the treeline. Still nothing. The shadows moved, but only from the firelight and wind. I told myself to calm down. It could be someone playing a game, or maybe some creepy guy down the road who saw me. I thought about calling the park rangers, but decided against it. No signal. And besides, what would I say? Hey, some stranger just sent me creepy texts from nowhere? I packed up my phone and put it away, but the feeling didn't go away. The woods felt less peaceful, like something was watching just beyond the firelight. Around 11 p.m., I was ready to turn in. I put out the fire with water, making sure it was completely out, zipped up my tent, and lay down. But sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing small noises, branches breaking, faint rustling. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or an animal, but it felt too close, too deliberate. Then, my phone buzzed again. I hadn't charged it fully before the trip, but somehow, it lit up with a message from the same number. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. This time, it was another photo. A close-up of my tent zipper, half open. I bolted upright, heart in my throat. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it all around. Nothing. No footprints, no movement, no sign anyone had been near the tent. I shook my head, telling myself maybe I'd left the zipper undone when I went to bed. But I was sure I'd closed it tightly. Still, the picture was real. The angle, the fabric, the zipper, it was definitely my tent. I started feeling trapped, like I couldn't stay here. But I didn't want to run out into the dark woods alone either. I sat up the rest of the night, flashlight on, phone face down on my sleeping bag, trying to listen past every little sound. At first light, I packed up as fast as I could. I kept my eyes peeled for anything, tracks, discarded items, anything that might explain what was going on. Near the fire ring, I noticed faint footprints in the damp soil. They were smaller than mine, and the pattern didn't match any of my boots. They circled the tent, slow, deliberate steps all around. No trail leading in or out, just that ring. I walked the perimeter, trying to find where someone might have come from or left, but there was nothing, just forest. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and called the park ranger on my phone once I had signal a few miles down the road. I told them about the texts, the photos, the footprints. They said they'd send a patrol, but when I asked if anyone else was camping nearby, they said the campground had been empty all night. I left that day, driving away faster than I ever had from any place. I checked the number again, no name, no info, just the same number. I blocked it, deleted everything. I never went back to that campground, and I never heard from that number again. But sometimes, when I'm sitting alone at home, my phone lights up with a message from a random number, and for a split second, my stomach drops. Because I remember that fire, the dark woods, and the way someone got close enough to take pictures without me seeing them at all. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me in the woods. I'd planned this solo camping trip for weeks, needed some time away from everything, no distractions, no people. I picked a spot deep in a state park I'd been to a couple times before, a place with a good mix of dense trees and a small creek nearby. I wanted the kind of isolation where your phone barely works, and the only sound is the wind through the branches. I got there late afternoon, set up my tent, and built a small fire before it got dark. The usual stuff, nothing fancy. I left word with my buddy Jake where I was, but he was a good 6 or 7 miles away at his own campsite, so it wasn't like he could just pop over if I needed help. We'd been camping separately for years now. I figured I'd be totally alone. That first night was peaceful. The fire crackled, I roasted some hot dogs, and just relaxed. I noticed some birds still active even as it got darker, which was weird because usually they're gone by then. But whatever, maybe they were late sleepers. I shrugged it off. I wasn't really paying attention to the woods beyond the firelight until I heard it, a faint whisper. I thought it was the wind messing with my ears at first, but then it came again, clearer. It sounded like someone saying my name. Not shouting or calling out, just a soft whisper, like the words barely made it out of someone's mouth. Jason. I froze. It was exactly my name, the way Jake calls me sometimes, but I knew Jake was miles away. I checked my phone, no signal, of course. Tried calling Jake, but nothing. The forest was quiet except for the whisper, and it wasn't more than a few feet past the firelight. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But nothing answered. I scanned the trees with my flashlight. No movement. Just the shadows dancing in the wind. I figured maybe it was some prank or someone else camping nearby trying to freak me out. But I checked when I arrived, no one else was around. The park was almost empty this time of year. The whisper came again, just a single word, Jason. I swallowed hard and stayed where I was, not wanting to wander off into the dark woods. I told myself it was my imagination or maybe an animal mimicking sounds, though I'd never heard anything like that before. Later, around 11 p.m., I zipped up my tent and tried to sleep. The whisper didn't come back, but something else did, the feeling of being watched. Like ice just out of the reach of the firelight. I hear twigs snap or leaves rustle, but whenever I shined my flashlight around, nothing was there. I remember the silence being almost too loud. The usual forest sounds had stopped. No birds, no insects. Just my own breathing and the distant rustling. The next morning, I decided to explore a little further, hoping to shake off the weird feeling. I found a narrow path I hadn't noticed before, barely wide enough for one person. It looked fresh, like someone had been walking it recently. There were no other tracks, just mine. That afternoon, I tried calling Jake again when I finally got a weak signal. I told him about the whisper. He laughed it off, said it was probably just some prank by other campers, or I was just spooked. I didn't believe him. Something felt off. That night, the whisper came again. This time, closer. Jason. I swear, it was right outside my tent, maybe 5 feet away. My heart was pounding. I zipped up the tent door fully and sat against it, flashlight in hand, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, I heard a faint cough from outside, like someone clearing their throat. My eyes shot toward the tent flap. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat with the flashlight on, trying to keep my ears open for anything. The next morning, I packed quickly. Before leaving, I decided to check the area near my tent. That's when I saw footprints. Small, narrow, not mine and not Jake's. They circled the tent like someone had been pacing. The prints were fresh, pressed into the soft dirt. I looked closer and saw something else, scratches on a nearby tree. I moved closer and saw the letters JAS carved roughly into the bark. Not my full name, but close enough to send a chill down my spine. I took a step back and scanned the tree line. No one in sight. I grabbed my gear and left as fast as I could. I told Jake everything as soon as I reached a place with cell service. He was quiet for a moment and then told me to be careful and maybe not go camping alone anymore. I don't know who was out there whispering my name, watching me. I never found out. But I'm sure of one thing, I wasn't alone that weekend. And the woods kept their secret. I never thought much about camping alone until that night. I mean, I'd done it a few times before without any issues, just me, a tent, and the woods. I picked a spot deep in a state park, far enough from the main trails to feel like I had the place to myself. I set up camp just before sunset, made a fire, cooked some food, and settled in for what I figured would be a quiet night. The first few hours were normal. I was just sitting by the fire, scrolling through my phone with barely any signal, when I noticed the woods around me felt off. Like something was missing. The usual night sounds, crickets, frogs, even the wind had all but stopped. It was dead quiet except for the crackling of the fire. I thought maybe it was just a lull and tried not to get weirded out. I went to my tent to get some water, and that's when I heard it, a soft rustling, like someone moving just beyond the firelight. I froze, listening. Nothing else. No voices, no footsteps, just that faint shuffle. I told myself it was probably an animal, a raccoon maybe, and went back to the fire. Later, after putting out the fire and crawling into my sleeping bag, I heard something else. A faint sound, almost like a zipper being pulled. At first, I thought it was the wind messing with the tent flap, but then it happened again. Clear as day, the sound of my tent zipper sliding down. I sat up fast and shined my flashlight toward the tent door. The zipper was halfway open. My heart jumped. I reached for the zipper and pulled it back up, but then I noticed the ground just outside the tent. Fresh footprints. They were muddy and looked too big to be mine or anyone I knew. I scanned the dark woods with my flashlight. Nothing. No shapes, no movement. I zipped up the tent fully and lay back down, trying not to panic. Every little sound made me jump, the snap of a twig, the distant howl of a coyote. I kept thinking I'd hear someone breathing or shuffling outside, but nothing. At some point, I dozed off. But then, just as I was almost asleep again, I heard a soft whisper, maybe 20 feet from my tent. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a human voice. It stopped quickly, then silence again. I stayed in my sleeping bag, flashlight on, eyes glued to the zipper. I thought about calling someone, but my phone had no service. By dawn, the footprints were still there, circling the tent in a wide loop. No other signs of whoever had been outside. I packed up as fast as I could, not even bothering to eat. I drove straight home, locking my doors the whole way. I never found out who was out there that night. But knowing someone was close enough to unzip my tent while I was inside, that's something I won't forget. I'm not usually the type to get freaked out camping. I've done solo trips in the backcountry before, and most nights are just peaceful, maybe a little cold or noisy with wildlife, but nothing more than that. But this one trip, yeah, that was different. That night stuck with me in a way I can't really explain. I picked this spot deep in the woods, far off the main road, on a little dirt track that ended at a clearing. I got there just before dusk, set up my tent, and started a fire. It was one of those perfect spots, you know? Quiet except for the occasional bird, some rustling leaves. Nothing weird at all. At least, that's how it started. After I got my gear sorted, I sat back and had some canned chili and a beer I'd brought along. The sun was dipping low, and I was just enjoying the silence. No cell service, no distractions, just me in the woods. I was comfortable with that. Thought I'd sleep well, get an early start the next day. But then, after dark, I heard a car. I thought it was odd that this place was pretty remote, and I didn't see any other cars when I arrived. At first, it was just a flash of headlights through the trees. Then I heard the engine, faint but clear. A car drove past the end of the dirt track, barely slowing down, headlights briefly lighting up my camp gear. I saw the metal water bottle, the tent outline, the little fire pit I'd made. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe someone heading home or just passing through. But then, about 20 minutes later, the headlights came back again. This time, the car slowed down more than before, and the light stayed on my camp a few seconds longer. I caught a glimpse of the driver's face, a guy, maybe in his 40s or 50s, just staring straight ahead. I waved, hoping to look casual. No response. The car rolled past slowly, and I noticed the engine sounded a bit louder, like he wasn't in a hurry. My stomach tightened a bit, but I told myself it was probably just coincidence. Then, another 30 minutes went by. The headlights appeared again, but this time, the car barely moved. I could see the grill and bumper in the glow of my campfire. The guy was sitting still, engine idling. I grabbed my flashlight, shone it toward the road, but there was no reaction. The headlights stayed on me for a minute, then the car started creeping forward slowly. At that moment, I realized he was driving around the perimeter of the clearing. The car rolled just past the tree line, slowed even more, then stopped. I didn't want to move or make a sound. I sat frozen, heart pounding, trying to tell myself it was just some weirdo checking out the woods. After a few minutes, the car started moving again. This time, it was slower than before, almost like he was taking his time. The headlights lit the trees in a kind of eerie way, and I could hear the gravel crunching under the tires. It circled the clearing again, the beam briefly catching my tent, my backpack, my fire pit. Then it stopped across the road from me and stayed there for a long time. I could see the driver, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring into the woods, like he was watching something just beyond my sight. The air got cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter. I debated calling the cops, but no cell signal. I tried to stay calm, kept the fire going and made sure my knife was within reach. Eventually, the car started moving again, but this time it headed back toward the main road. I watched it disappear down the dirt track. I didn't sleep much after that. Every little noise made me jump. Leaves falling, branches snapping, even the wind sounded like footsteps. I kept checking the trees around the clearing, looking for any sign that someone had gotten closer. At dawn, I packed up as fast as I could and left. On the way back, I passed the main road and saw a gas station where a few cars were parked. I stopped and asked the clerk if anyone had been driving around those woods late at night. She hesitated but said, "Yeah, there's been a guy in a beaten-up truck driving slow near the forest edge the last few days, asking questions about campers." I left right after, not looking back. It was just a guy in a car, nothing supernatural or anything. But the way he kept coming back, driving slower each time, staring like I was something to study, that's what got under my skin. I don't go back to that spot anymore. I never thought I'd get creeped out camping. I mean, I've spent plenty of nights alone in the woods, no problem. But this one time? Yeah, that was different. It started just like any other trip. I found a decent spot, set up my tent, made a fire. Quiet place, nothing fancy, just me and the trees. I was about 2 hours into the evening, cooking some instant noodles over the fire, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At the entrance of my tent, right by the zipper, there was a folded piece of paper. I didn't see anyone around, and I definitely hadn't left anything there earlier. The weird part? My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a map, but not the kind you get from a park office. It wasn't labeled or anything official. Just a crudely drawn sketch of the surrounding woods. There were no trails marked, no landmarks I recognized, but there was a red line drawn winding deep into a part of the forest I hadn't explored. Like an unmarked section that didn't appear on any map I'd looked at. I was already unsettled, but curiosity got the better of me. I stared at that map for what felt like forever. Who had left it? Why did they know my name? And why lead me somewhere no one else seemed to know about? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I kept hearing small noises, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but every time I turned my flashlight toward the sound, nothing was there. The fire crackled, and shadows danced, but it felt like the darkness was thicker than usual. Then, around midnight, I heard it. Someone whispering my name. Soft, almost like the wind, but clear. I froze. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe an animal making noises. The thing was, I was sure no one else knew I was camping here. My friend I told about the trip was miles away in the city and had no idea where exactly I was. The next morning, I decided to follow the map, thinking maybe I'd find some sort of trail or clue. The woods got denser the farther I went, the trees thick and close, branches scratching at my jacket. No birds, no animals, just this weird silence that felt heavier the deeper I walked. As I followed the red line, I kept noticing strange things. Footprints that didn't match mine or any animals. Some looked fresh, others older, like someone had been here repeatedly. Broken branches at odd heights, as if someone was moving through without paying attention. I even found some trash, like fast food wrappers, that looked recent. Weird, since this part of the forest was supposed to be untouched. I started hearing footsteps behind me, but when I stopped and looked, there was no one there. Just trees. The silence stretched on, and every sound my boots made seemed amplified. After an hour of walking, the path on the map ended in a small clearing I'd never seen before. It was empty, but I spotted a shallow hole dug near a tree. There were some scraps of cloth nearby, torn and dirty. I got a sick feeling in my stomach. Suddenly, I heard a branch snap again, closer this time. My heart jumped. I spun around, flashlight out, shining it through the trees, but no movement. Just shadows. The sun was getting lower, and I knew I should turn back, but I also didn't want to run blind. That's when I saw him, a guy standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. His face was partly hidden by a hood, and he was watching me. Not saying anything. Just staring. I called out, "Hey, what's this about? Who left the map?" No answer. Just silence. I told him to back off, started walking toward the trees, but he didn't move. I noticed he was holding something, a long stick or maybe a branch. I wasn't sure. I kept my distance, backing away slowly, trying not to panic. After a minute or two, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't wait around. I booked it back the way I came, not looking back. The footsteps I'd heard earlier returned, but I ignored them. I didn't stop until I was back at my campsite. When I got there, the map was gone. No idea who took it or why they left it in the first place. I packed up and drove out of there as fast as I could. It was just some guy, probably watching the woods for whatever reason. But that night, and that strange map, it felt like something was off, like I was being drawn into something I shouldn't have been. I haven't been back to that area since. It was late summer, and I decided to spend a weekend camping alone in this state park I'd never been to before. Nothing fancy, just me, a tent, and some basic gear. The park was popular but big enough that you could still find a quiet spot if you got a little off the main paths. I found one of those spots near a small creek, tucked in behind some thick trees. Perfect for some peace and quiet. When I arrived, there was one other camper already set up a little ways down the trail. A guy, probably mid-30s, maybe a little older, alone like me. We nodded at each other as he walked past my site to check the creek. He was quiet but friendly enough when I said hi. That first night was pretty normal. I made a fire, cooked some noodles, and settled in early. The guy from down the trail said he was heading out for a quick walk before dark. I told him to be careful. He smiled, said thanks, and disappeared into the trees. That was around 8:15 p.m. I sat by my fire for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest at night, the usual stuff, owls, crickets, the creek bubbling nearby. But as the minutes passed, I started noticing things that didn't add up. First, I heard footsteps on the dirt trail. I assumed it was the guy coming back from his walk. But the sound was off. Slower than before, and heavier, like someone was dragging their feet a bit. It got closer, then stopped just beyond my tent's firelight. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the path, expecting to see the guy, but the beam only caught empty bushes swaying in the night breeze. A weird silence settled in after that. No footsteps. No rustling. Nothing but the creek and the fire popping. It made me uneasy, but I figured maybe he'd changed his mind or was taking a different route back. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me tense up. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of something moving near the edge of the trees. I was sure someone was walking close by, but I couldn't see a thing. My flashlight batteries were low, so I didn't bother trying to spot anything. Morning came, and I was relieved. I figured the guy was probably back by now and had just taken a longer walk than he thought. I packed some food and planned to hit the main road to grab a signal and call a friend, just to let them know where I was. When I checked the spot where his tent had been, he'd left it empty. No gear, no sign he'd been there at all except a few flattened leaves where the tent had stood. I started to worry. I called out his name, but only the echo came back. No footprints heading out, no sign of him on the trail. I thought maybe he'd gone back down to the parking lot or maybe moved to another spot. Still, something felt wrong. Then, about a quarter-mile down the main trail, I saw it. His phone, smashed to bits on the ground. The screen was shattered, the case cracked and scuffed. It looked like it had been thrown or dropped hard. I picked it up carefully, half hoping I'd find some clue, a text, a photo, anything. But the battery was dead, and it was impossible to turn on. That's when the sun really started to rise, and I realized how alone I was. No other campers in sight, no hikers on the trails. The park office was miles away, and I didn't have service on my phone either. I sat down on a rock, heart racing, and tried to figure out what to do. I was debating whether to call the ranger station or just pack up and leave when I heard a noise behind me, footsteps on the dry leaves. I spun around, flashlight raised, but it was only a guy walking a dog on the main trail. I told him about the phone and the missing camper, but he just shrugged and said no one else had been around all night. I ended up hiking back out to the parking lot, telling the park rangers what happened. They said they'd send someone to look, but after hours of searching, there was no sign of the guy or anything unusual. I don't know what happened to him. The smashed phone and empty campsite were the only clues. Whatever it was bad enough to scare him or worse. I haven't been back to that park since.